As a business owner, having the CFA charter gave me both the confidence and also the credibility, which was recognized by both my peers and also by my clients. My name is Ariel Jacobs Batoni. I am a CFA charter holder and a certified financial planner. I am an entrepreneur, a wife, and also a mother. I run Good Balance Financial Planning, a fee-only registered investment advisory firm serving professional women and couples in the Los Angeles area. My career has taken a winding path. I began my career as a financial economic litigation consultant, and in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, I transitioned into the mortgage industry and ultimately became a senior structurer where I was actively involved in creating mortgage-backed securities. The financial crisis of 2008 caused me to pivot into the municipal space, where I was an institutional salesperson. After becoming a mother and having some time to reflect on my journey, I decided to transition into wealth management, where I am today. I discovered the CFA program while I was working in the mortgage industry. I was very excited to learn that you can pursue the CFA designation while working. And to make it even more compelling, my employer sponsored me. So it made it a very complimentary choice and very attractive to me. My CFA journey was definitely challenging. I took advantage of companies that offered test preparation. They offered materials that reviewed all of the different areas that the CFA test covers, and also gave specific study schedules and a lot of aids that were helpful. Being involved in the CFA Society has been rewarding for me in many ways. I have made meaningful connections and many close friendships that have fueled me to become more engaged in greater diversity and inclusion initiatives. Some of these initiatives include co-founding the nonprofit Collaborative Women in Investment Management, co-chairing the Gender Diversity Subcommittee for CFA Institute, and continuing to chair the Women's Advisory Council for CFA Los Angeles. To address young women who are interested in pursuing the CFA designation, my advice would be just don't let it intimidate you. Earning the CFA designation demonstrates a high caliber of knowledge and also has the potential to open doors.
Of the CFA Institute's Global Careers Week. So I'm Azmi Özünlü. I work as a senior director at the CFA Institute, in particular producing content for our various programs, including the private markets, the certifications, the private market stack of programs that we have here. Our guest today is Eihorere Wesigye. I'm very excited to introduce Eihorere. He's a private markets professional with over a decade of experience in financial services, spanning both investment banking and asset management. He's worked globally, handling investments across many different asset classes across various regions. Currently, Eihorere is part of the Special Situations team at British International Investments PLC, which is the UK's development finance institution. In this role, he's managing distressed investments in Africa and South Asia. Eihorere is also a very active volunteer with the CFA Institute, having served on an education advisory committee and reviewing tons of educational materials for us, including some that I have authored myself, appearing on our practitioner perspective videos and volunteering his time generously for various webinars and other events that we have. He is, of course, a CFA charter holder and has an MBA from INSEAD with distinction. Welcome, Eihorere.
Thanks, Azmi.
So first, a couple of housekeeping points that I'd like to start out with. We are scheduled for 45 minutes starting now, and that also includes time towards the end for questions from the audience. We have two groups of audience members today, those joining through Zoom and also our viewers on LinkedIn Live. So welcome to both groups. For Zoom participants, to optimize the session, the participants are muted throughout the session, and you can submit your questions via the Q&A box. For LinkedIn Live participants, you can use the chat box to submit your questions, and they will be transferred onto our Q&A box, and we will get to those towards the end. We'll be running a few polling questions in the next couple of minutes, and you will be promoted to submit your answers. Again, those of you on LinkedIn, you can type in your answers into chat. And finally, this session will be recorded and shared with everyone who has registered. So let's start out with the polling questions, and Eihorere, I think this will give us a good idea about our audience as well. So I'm just seeing them on the screen right now. If you don't mind, audience members taking a few minutes to answer these questions, and then we'll begin our session. All right, so we have about 2/3 of our audience members currently participating. So let's take a look at the results. So the first one was which of these choices describes you best? And we have roughly an even split between people who are currently in education, whether that's undergraduate or postgraduates, and people who are working in a related field but not in private markets, such as investment banking or asset management, and people who are working in an unrelated field but interested in transitioning to private markets. So there was roughly an even split between them. For the second question, what do you think is the biggest challenge in getting a private markets job? The chart topper there was lack of relevant experience. So that's one of the things that we'll actually talk about with Eihorere. The second one after that was, joint second place was lack of relevant skills and education and not enough networking opportunities. Third question was, which part of private markets is of most interest to you? And the clear winner here was private equity with 65%, followed a distant second, private credit, 17%, and infrastructure and real assets, a close third at 14%. And the fewest number of people showed an interest in venture capital, which is a bit of a change from the previous webinar I hosted earlier this week, where venture capital was a close second. So that's very interesting. So Eihorere, thanks again for agreeing to be a guest on our webinar. And if that's okay, I'd like to start out with some quick fire questions. So the rule here is for the question, the answer can be a yes or a no or a maybe, if you have to say maybe. And if it is a maybe, then no more than 2 sentences before we go on to the main questions. Are you ready?
Perfect.
All right, question number 1. Is it essential to have prior investment banking or finance experience to break into private markets? Okay. Number 2, do certifications like private markets qualifications or the CFA significantly increase your chances of getting your foot in the door?
Yes.
Should someone starting out prioritize gaining experience in developed markets first, rather than jumping straight into emerging markets?
Difficult to answer. It depends.
Okay. Number 4, what is more important initially in your career, networking or technical skills?
Technical skills.
Okay. And what is more important later on in your career, technical skills or networking?
Networking.
All right, last one. Can someone from an emerging market realistically build an impactful career in private equity or private debt without having to relocate to a major financial hub?
Yes, but it would be challenging.
Great. And we'll talk about some of those challenges in the next few minutes. Great. Thank you very much, Eihorere. So could you tell us briefly about your journey into private markets? For example, how did you get started, and what drew you into this field? Because you've transitioned from another field of finance.
Thanks, Azmi. I am Ugandan and South African by background, and welcome also firstly to all the participants. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be able to share with you during the course of today's session. But just to continue on that, I am Ugandan, lived in about 5 countries, moved to South Africa where I did most of my early life education, had no real idea about private markets, had no real idea about the CFA Institute, really. No one in my family has a finance or investment background. Went into university, studied to be a chartered accountant, realized I found the finance aspects as part of the course material during university far more interesting than perhaps becoming an auditor. And so decided to try pursue my early career by going into a bank. And I joined a bank in South Africa, which is a specialist bank called Investec. Did a training program there. And it was during that time, I think it was in my 3rd year, that I started to get exposure to private markets when I rotated in a team called Principal Investments, which did on-balance sheet private equity for the bank in South Africa. Realized at that point in time that I wanted to build a career within investments. Hadn't even started the CFA program, but I'd heard about it by that point in time. I think it was quite the rage when I was at university. I'm sure it still is. Then decided I wanted to do 2 things at that point in my career. I wanted to be in the private market space, in investments, but I also wanted to have a exposure to Africa, being that I myself am African and had grown up on the continent. So I then joined our asset management division. For those who don't know what asset management is, it is essentially the management of pools of capital from either institutions or individuals, but asset managers tend to focus on institutions, given that they tend to like to raise capital at scale. So they raise money from people like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, so very large organizations, and then they invest it in different strategies, which you learn about as part of the CFA program curriculum. When I joined the asset management division within this bank, I was in the Africa team, and that's when I got my first real exposure to private markets, working across their private credit and infrastructure investment vehicles. So we focused on doing transactions across sub-Saharan Africa. So I did very interesting work where we did financing of an airport in a country like Madagascar. I worked on telecommunications transactions. I'm sure we all know what those are. We have cell phones, so financing the cellular providers which offer data and broadband and voice connectivity, and then also some of the fiber companies. And so that role basically gave me the best of both worlds. It gave me private markets, it gave me Africa. And so I really enjoyed that. About 3.5 years into that journey, though, I had a mentor who had lived in the US, had just moved to South Africa from California. He essentially inspired me to consider getting a global experience. So I decided to think of ways to do that. You don't have to always do this, but in my case, I decided to pursue an MBA and did that in France, which was a really great learning experience. Didn't really know whether I was going to stay in Europe post my MBA, but knew I was going to go back into investments. I think at that point, it was quite clear that's the journey I wanted to be on in terms of building my career. And so I got an opportunity at that point in time to actually rejoin my initial employer, the bank in the United Kingdom, in their principal investments team, but this time focused on investments across Europe, Australia, the US. And so that took me now back into private markets, but on a private equity lens. Did that for just over 4 years and then transitioned into my current role where I focus on the distress side. So yeah, I think the journey has mostly been about going with where the opportunities are, but I also had quite a clear inkling, I think, within 3 years of my early career that I wanted to try build a career within private markets, which was even at that stage was quite small within the South African context. But then just trying to think around where and how I could leverage my background, my experience, because I didn't really have many connections at that point in time, but how could I try carve my path? And it's worth mentioning that when I did join the asset manager, so about 3 years into my career, I started the CFA program.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Eihorere. And you've also partially answered my second question, actually, which was about looking back at your career. What were some key turning points or decisions that significantly shaped the rest of your trajectory? And you've already mentioned your mentor advising you to do an MBA. And then prior to that, you talked about how you've decided that the finance and asset management side of things was of a lot more interest to you than accounting, and therefore you have no interest in becoming an auditor. So sounds like those two key sort of turning points. What other turning points can you think about when you look back on your career?
So I think those were some of the really big key turning points. I think also when I look back at it, I had mentors. And I think the biggest impact or input into my career and the different decisions I took at different points in time were my mentors. And so I was very privileged to have very good mentors who were able to give me insights at points in times where I may not necessarily have known what to do. I would also say another was just global aspects. I think when I had joined the Africa investment team earlier in my career, I think one thing that I picked up quite quickly was how sensitive, for example, the performance of investments in Africa were to global interest rates. And so in order to adapt to that, I thought it was critical to get a global skill set and to get a skill set in other markets. And so to strengthen my educational background on that front. The great thing with the CFA program is obviously it gives you the capacity to do that without necessarily having to uproot yourself and move into a different context by giving you educational material that is really relevant and appropriate for what you're doing in a global context, whether you'll be in Vietnam, whether you're in the US, or whether you're in Africa.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And so you are currently working at British International Investments, which is the UK's development finance company. And you're working in the special situations team. So what exactly does your team do, and what is your typical day-to-day role? And just as a side note, you are currently on a work trip, I believe, and joining us probably potentially on the field where some of your investments are located.
Yes, so I'm currently in Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm here for work purposes. I have to warn you, unfortunately, there is load shedding, so there is also the chance that I may lose power, but if that happens, I will reconnect. In terms of my current role, I think it's mostly focused on working around distressed investments. So we manage a portfolio where we've had underperformance around our existing investment portfolio. So we've invested across Africa and Asia. Obviously, in good times, investments do well, and hopefully you're able to exit and sell them. But sometimes one of the biggest challenges we've seen, especially in the Africa space, but more broadly in the emerging market spaces, has been as interest rates have risen across the US and the West. The pools of capital have moved from emerging markets primarily to developed markets, which has made it harder to exit, more difficult valuations. And then sometimes you're just dealing with complicated individuals. And so you could have instances of fraud or
And
other issues that could develop for a company.
of course. So by the time investments land on your desk, I think it's fair to say that there's already some trouble brewing. What are some common misconceptions that you have observed about investing in distressed assets, especially in regions where you currently specialized, such as Africa and South Asia?
I think one of the biggest, most common misconceptions around distressed investments in this context is that they primarily happen in emerging markets. I think in my prior role, having worked on the developed market side, we also, particularly when COVID hit, I mean, COVID was a very particular, obviously, global shock, but we did also see instances of some of the similarities around issues in the performance of the companies, the management of companies, and the management of investments and co-investor dynamics play out that are very much similar to what you would see within the emerging market space. And I think that there's a big misperception a lot of the time that there's a lot more risk in investing in emerging markets. Now, there are particular nuances to investing within the space. Obviously, you have currency risk, you may have political risk, although one could argue that that is also the case in some developed markets today and has been for a while. But you do have also ways to ensure or protect against those risks. But what for me has been critical in understanding and has been a learning curve for myself is the fact that at the end of the day, you can have very difficult co-investors or difficult partners across the globe. And so I think that's a big misconception a lot of the time. Now, are there instances of unique circumstances that could play out in an emerging market context? Definitely. But I would say that when you are dealing with challenging investments, this can happen anyway.
It's very interesting. And of course, your employer, British International Investments, is quite unique in that it's not entirely profit driven. So how does the balance of achieving financial returns with creating meaningful developmental impact in emerging markets play out in real life?
It's a brilliant question. I think it's one we, even for our 75 years of existence and history, are trying to always grapple with is how do you deliver impact in emerging markets, but also deliver the right returns for ultimately our shareholder. In this case, I mean, we're primarily investing or almost entirely investing UK the UK public's money. So it's ultimately taxpayer funded primarily. We have a very large portfolio of close to 7 to 8 billion pounds. And in deploying it, we do want to be able to generate sufficient returns. But that also does carry with it the fact that we need to deliver impact. And sometimes there can be a degree of conflict where you can
I think we may have temporarily lost Eihorere with the internet connection there. So if you just asking the audience to excuse us for a few minutes whilst he's reconnecting. So whilst we're waiting for Eihorere to reconnect, oh, there we are.
I am sorry, I have to apologize for that. South Africa has returned to load shedding, so unfortunately I did lose connection, but I'm back.
Indeed, and demonstrating some of the unique risks that exist doing business out of emerging markets. And I probably should have mentioned earlier on, I myself am from the northern part of Cyprus, so I know firsthand experiences of working in emerging markets myself. So we were just discussing the balance, the difficult balancing act that British international investments has between returning a profit and creating impact in the regions and countries that they invest in.
Yes. And so I don't know where I may have cut off, but I think the main thing I would like to communicate around that is the fact that ultimately we try to do both. So every time we do look and evaluate investments, whether it be to provide private equity, whether it be to provide private debt, whether it would be to provide a blended instrument, we try to deliver both. Sometimes that might mean trying to attract commercial capital that seeks, but we seek to evaluate investments in a way that we can hopefully deliver the right return for the shareholder, but also delivering impact. And so sometimes it does require trade-offs, as you could expect, but we have really, I would say, a very robust development impact and environmental and social departments who help us assess how to do so appropriately. That does bring some other unique considerations into our investment decision making, which may not necessarily always apply in a commercial sense. We're probably a lot more reputationally shy, so we do not want to find ourselves exposed to something that will hopefully in a way make it into the news media in a negative way. But yes, I think ultimately we seek to make investments in such a way that we can deliver both, but it does come with its challenges.
Of course. And sometimes, of course, investments fail, whether that's in emerging markets or developed markets. As you said, investments don't always go successfully, and you have had your experience of some of those. Despite thorough planning and best of intentions, what is your experience of reasons for investments failing? And maybe you could categorize those as things that are within the portfolio company's control and things that are outside of their control, maybe.
I would say the primary cause of distress or financial underperformance for a lot of businesses is overgearing, so taking on too much debt. But that usually is a function of either poor management decision making or poor planning. Sometimes it's both. In other instances, you also do have macro shocks. I mean, you obviously alluded to the fact that you yourself do come from an emerging market, so you would have had potentially have had experience around perhaps sometimes political outcomes leading to macroeconomic adjustments. I would say the one thing we've seen in our portfolio companies, or more broadly in my career, is that when you have a weak CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and you have a weak board or an extremely strong CEO or a very strong chair, it can lead to suboptimal decision making. So a lot of it boils down to people. There are elements that are outside of people's control, of course, obviously, like as I've alluded to, the macro and the like. But if you're dealing with a person who wants to do corruption or wants to inflate financial reports or wants to do unethical actions in other ways, whether they be related party transactions or the like, unfortunately, yes, you'll have to manage that and deal with the consequences of that. It's very hard to have a successful investment when you're dealing with a very unethical partner or management.
And multiple investments have gone through your desk or computer, I should say. Which investment or project are you most proud of personally? And what made it particularly rewarding or impactful to Eihorere?
Sure, that's a great question. I would say early in my career when I still worked within the investment space, I'm going to cheat and give you two. I worked on an investment into an airport in Madagascar as part of my investment experience in the infrastructure space in the Africa market. And I mean, Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world. I mean, this investment was going to be approximately 5 to 10% of the country's GDP that year. I visited the country for the first time, and it was a rehabilitation and extension and expansion of the airport. And I think for me, just from a life outcome and having visited the country and seeing the level of living standards and the potential impact that investment would have on the country, never mind the commercial returns, I think it was quite humbling. And I don't come from the wealthiest background myself. So I think that would have been one of my career highlights in terms of transactions I worked on. In my current role, I'm currently working on a microfinance holding company that we're restructuring. Unfortunately, it ran into some financial difficulties, but I'm really happy with the way we've landed, having worked on it for the past year and a bit, where we've successfully been able to deliver an exit of selling one of the largest subsidiaries. And also on top of that, we're now currently in the process of, for the first time after 17 years being invested, delivering a return for us as shareholders, including my current employer, who haven't received any capital back after 17 years, but we're about to have quite a significant exit. So that has been quite rewarding, and it's been quite a lot of work and effort, but it's been rewarding.
Amazing stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's especially Madagascar. You hear about. I mean, there are massive differences, of course, in terms of development and GDP per capita and so on levels within the continent of Africa, and Madagascar is probably one of the least developed countries. At least it was at the time, wasn't it? And perhaps one more question similar to that. So these are two investments that you are most proud of. How about the most interesting investment, most unusual investment that has passed through your hands?
I would say we had in my prior company, we had an investment which was quite fascinating, whereby we had an investment that was essentially a sublease under the Lord's Cricket Ground, where we had exposure via a loan to a counterparty, but they essentially owned the rights to the lease that sat below the actual leaseholder that's above it, which owns the lease that ultimately the cricket ground stadium is built upon. I had never seen, I think, that kind of structure where essentially you have someone who has a lease that's essentially underground, that sits below a lease that's above it. And being Lord's Cricket Ground is quite iconic, I guess, in the cricket context. It was quite a fascinating transaction to look at. I would say in my current role, another one that was quite interesting is we're dealing with a situation where we've unfortunately discovered quite significant fraud. Financial statements were reported by close to 50%. And we've had to do things which are quite difficult, especially for a development finance institution, alongside our other co-investors, where we've had to remove executives, including a CFO and the CEO. We're now in legal processes with both of them. And we're trying to negotiate a settlement. So this is as bad as an investment could normally get in the private equity space, where you really have gloves off. But then getting into the detail of it and seeing all the other aspects that play out in the background as to how initially we got into this investment, why we had made it, what had been communicated to us, what we had missed. I think the lessons learned have been quite significant for me and I guess for the organization.
Very interesting stuff. So it's not always I think you've made it very clear that it's not always plain sailing. So Going back to careers and career advice as we're sort of approaching the end of our time, what specific skills or qualities do you think young professionals should cultivate if they want to succeed in private markets?
I would say a couple are quite important. I mean, I'm sure there's the technical, which everyone covers and will be told about, but I would say it's very important to be curious. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about private markets is the fact that, especially when you're doing investments, whether it be private equity or private credit or infrastructure, it's very structured transactions a lot of the time. You're always learning something new. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who have 30 plus years of experience, and even they are always learning something new. So curiosity is very important, I would say. It's not a can I call it cookie cutter career where essentially you can do one transaction and think you will rinse and repeat and it will look the same throughout. I think the ability and the capacity to deal with flux, deal with change, be flexible to learn and to be open-minded, I think is quite important, because a lot of the time you do need to structure things. If I talk about, like, if I talk from experience with the management, with the holding company that I mentioned earlier that we are currently in the process of exiting, we considered many routes, but ultimately landed on doing a management buyout. Now, structuring that, I led a lot of that, but that came from experience which I'd had to gather over 12 years in being able to just think of how to structure a jurisdictions, capacity to make payments through dividends versus redemption of shares, taxation implications, legal implications, what kind of legal structures could you use, what other entities do you need to form in order to be able to make a management buyout go ahead. So it's just the capacity to be curious is very important. Communication, obviously. I think that you need to be able to communicate well. This is a skill you develop over time. I think as you shadow and you work with people who are quite good communicators, you do build it. But I would say it sometimes is underestimated as people focus on being able to be very good at financial modeling and being very good at obviously doing the technical work. And I'd say finally, yeah, I think this is very important, especially as you go later career in this space, is you need to obviously be quite easygoing to be able to meet people, interact, and therefore network. So I would say it's an important skill, but I think it ties in with the second skill, particularly around communication, but also the willingness to put yourself out there. And the nature of private markets is that you can spend sometimes significant periods of times when nothing significant happens, but you've worked on a lot. So patience, I would say, is also an underestimated skill that's quite critical.
Very, very wise words indeed. And we also earlier on talked about the importance of building a network in addition to having the technical skills, and how as you transition from early career to mid-career, networking or the strength of your network, because it goes up in importance. If you had to give, let's say, 2 or 3 top tips to people who are either looking to transition into private markets or people who are still in education, what would those be?
Sure. In terms of how to network.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how to build a network or how to expand your network. What advice would you give to people who are perhaps not already working in financial services, or maybe they're working in a peripheral area, or people who are still in full-time education?
All right, perfect. I would say if I take the CFA Institute, for example, for me, this was my entry into learning a lot of what I know within finance. So if the CFA Institute has networking events, networking drinks, which it does, and you can access them and attend them. I know definitely the CFA UK Society has quite significant amounts of events it has for its members that it hosts. Those are perfect places to network initially, build a bit of a network and meet people in different parts of the industry and just learn and absorb. So I would definitely recommend professional bodies. And if you're looking within the investment space, so definitely the CFA Institute's events, if they are available within the country where you're based. I would also recommend industry events. So for example, if you're interested in private equity in Africa, there tends to be events such as the SAFTA Venture Capital and private equity conferences that are held. The events in London where I'm usually based. There are events in different parts of the world that are industry specific for that country, which I would say are really important platforms for networking and being able to meet people in the space that you want to work in. Now, if you're interested in real estate finance, then I'm sure there are those networking events, but you don't have to go out of your way and fly to different countries. I think it's just about being able to figure out what those are. Another thing I would say is very underrated is, and I wouldn't say doing this all the time, but if there is someone or you think has experience or has done things that you'd like to do, reaching out to them on LinkedIn. I've done it once in a while when I've wanted to speak to industry leaders and I just wanted to get 30 minutes of their time. And more often than not, I've been lucky enough that they've actually afforded me that time. It will not work all the time. People are obviously quite busy. People can't always make the time just to speak to everyone who reaches out to them. But if you reached out to 10 people and 2 people gave you their time, it's better than 0. I would say to get value out of that, though, you need to have done prep work beforehand. So if, for example, your interest is in, I'm just going to say, Africa private equity market, you want to learn more about it, you've done some reading, you know about 5 or 6 of the top funds, you know some of the investments they've made, then reaching up someone in one of those funds and being able to talk a bit to what you've read, I think is very different to just going in cold and asking them to tell you what they do. So I would say LinkedIn is an underrated resource for that. And I tend to encourage people. I've seen people get jobs in the industry. I had a friend who was completing a master's in the US, reached out to someone who on LinkedIn because they were passing through London, ended up getting a full-time job there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is a great resource. I certainly agree with that. And I mean, I have some personal stories of my students back when I was a lecturer who got jobs through networking on LinkedIn. So it's certainly potentially a very valuable resource. So I think we have enough time for a few questions from the audience. There's one very interesting question. I think this is from one of our LinkedIn Live viewers. So this is an engineer, a space and aircraft engineer, mid-career from France, and currently pursuing CFA. What they're asking is pursuing a finance career just an illusion, or should I maybe stay in my industry and find something complementary with my profile? Thanks for your honest and objective answer.
Okay, I would start by saying the fact that this person has completed and is a qualified aerospace engineer with quite specific skill set means they are pretty much quite analytically capable of doing most finance roles. I think sometimes there's a fear factor that is involved with finance roles around the complexities, which, to be quite honest with you, I think a lot of the financial or the analytical capabilities in engineering are probably a level above some of the ones you'll see in finance. So definitely on a technical side, you have experience which could be quite valuable. I would say if you are much later career and you're considering this kind of pivot, perhaps the best way to consider it would be through looking for investment firms or investment vehicles that are very much aligned with your experience. Now, if I was trying to start a venture capital firm that's going to invest in earlier stage businesses within the engineering or aerospace defense industry and the like, you would be the kind of skill set I'd want to leverage. So it's about thinking through, instead of taking a generalist approach and saying, how do I get into it in a generalist way? How do you leverage what you have for what you want? And so that is what I would say is the best way to perhaps go about looking about transitioning. But it is possible. It does happen. And I think especially when you are looking at doing or targeting very niche focused financial services firms, in the private equity space, you get, for example, healthcare firms, which love to hire doctors. So definitely do not underestimate your background.
Thanks, and yeah, I can personally attest to that. There are many other professionals that we have encountered over the years with degrees in life sciences, for example, investing in biotechnology in private markets and so on. So yeah, so playing to your strengths is certainly very good advice. So another interesting question. So this is somebody who is from Brazil, studying in London, and is interested in making a positive impact in their home country through private markets, and is wondering about the possibility of doing that out of London, and whether investing in South America through London is a big thing, or whether he should be seeking career opportunities closer to home.
Good question. I would say that I do know there are investment funds or investment institutions which do invest across emerging markets. So in London, I don't want to use the platform to name specific names, but you can research and try find investment firms that do investments across, for example, Latin America or South America and other emerging markets which could be of interest. But do not also underestimate that if you're able to get an investment role that, let's say, focuses primarily on Africa or Asia or both, and one day want to transition into South America or Brazil, I think that will be highly valued experience anyway. And if you also got investment experience doing developed markets in Europe, highly valuable experience. So I would say that the important thing is actually being able to get a role or get a foot into the door of the industry and starting your career that way. But if you can get a role in Brazil where you want to be and you want to be on the ground, you can be on the ground and add value from day one, I think that might be the sweet spot, unless, of course, you do want to be based in London for many other reasons, and that's perfectly fine as well. But I do think there are institutions that do exist that have the capacity to give you that kind of experience and exposure. Some may not necessarily be in London, they may be in other parts of Europe. I was actually speaking to some of our development finance institution partners who invest, I know, quite well in Latin America. They're based in other parts of Europe. I don't want to give them away because I don't want to promote them for the sake of it. But if you do some research, there are institutions out there that do invest in Brazil. And whether you be based in Europe, also in Washington, they exist. By saying Washington, I think I'm quite clear.
Market, isn't it? It's a great success story, especially what's been happening in the last 2 decades. So I think we have time for just one more question from the audience. And again, I think this is from another LinkedIn viewer. And this is a question that's going to be close to your heart, Eihorere. So the question is, how difficult is the shift from being an accountant to becoming an investment analyst? Do you have any tips that can make this shift a bit easier? So this viewer has an undergraduate degree in finance, and they have already cleared CFA level 1.
Wow. Okay. Very good question. I would say that I never ever really worked as an accountant. I did study accounting, and I would say if you have an accounting background or you have an accounting basis where you've learned your experience and gotten a lot of experience, you have one of the key ingredients to investment decision making, whether it be across public markets or private markets, and that's understanding financial statements. I cannot underestimate how critical that is. It's impossible to model if you don't really know what you're modeling, or where you're modeling to, or how it could impact the financial statements. So I think having an accounting or financial reporting base is almost always valuable if you want to have a career within the investment space. And so, yeah, I can only say, and if you complement that with a CFA, then I think you really set yourself up, especially if you want to work out, say, even in the public market space where you're evaluating listed companies' results, making forecasts, building models. It's an incredibly powerful combination. So hopefully it does make your CFA experience a little bit easier, because the financial reporting does sometimes cause some challenges for candidates. But definitely I would say I cannot see how it could ever be a hindrance. I'm more than happy, Azmi, to take one more question, just given my slight technical issues. So if it's
no, it's fine. I mean, I think actually just with that question, and when you touched up on modeling, we ended up answering one more of the audience's question, who asked about some of the key hard skills. that you need in private markets. And I know you are a big proponent of modeling. But we have come to the end of our allocated time, Eihorere. Thank you very much for volunteering your time again to the CFA Institute, as you have been so many times before. It has been a very useful, very interesting session for me. I hope the audience also agrees. For those of you who want to stay tuned, we have our upcoming webinar as part of the Global Careers Week, which is about careers in sustainability, which is an area of interest to many of you, whether that's in developed or emerging markets. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching.
I think that my CFA designation strengthened my ability to create value, to influence my organization, because I feel equipped to understand the investment thesis, but also to bring that sustainability lens that would resonate with the reality of the portfolio company. My name is François Crémet. I'm a Senior Director in the Sustainable Investment Team at CDPQ, and I'm based in Montreal. I was born and raised in France, and I came at the age of 19 to Canada to study at HEC Montreal. I graduated in market finance and started my career in strategy and management consulting. Over the years, I've supported banks, insurance companies, asset managers, and that's what really led me to join CDPQ in 2017. My first role at CDPQ was to support the globalization program of the organization. It was a fantastic experience that led to the better integration of international offices in our investment and operational processes, and to the creation of 2 regional hubs in London and Singapore. Then I supported the setup of the Investor Leadership Network, which is a collaborative platform of investors interested in long-term growth and sustainability. It's about at that time that I've decided to go for the CFA with a desire to enhance my technical knowledge of the financial industry. In our industry, the CFA designation is really seen as a badge of commitment and credibility. And since I obtained it, I've seen my responsibilities broaden, not only by being invited to join an investment committee in my organization. The CFA program was all about getting the technical knowledge that I need to better interact with my peers on the investment side. I really wanted to speak the same language and to be able to understand their realities in order to better advise them in their decision-making process. Combined with my sustainability and consulting background, I feel that the CFA program enhanced my ability to create value and to advise my colleagues on the investment side and to guide my colleagues from the same team in the same direction. I believe that to make better decisions, we need a diversity of thoughts, of backgrounds, of profiles. I would really like to encourage all of those coming from non-traditional backgrounds, not from the inner circle of investment professionals, to see the CFA as a way to accelerate their career, because it can be very well combined with different academic and professional paths. To meet the challenge we face, the investment industry will need diverse profiles. And I think the CFA can be seen as a link between those coming from that industry and those coming from a non-traditional background. I am convinced that the integration of ESG considerations in the investment decision-making process is a trend, and a trend that is here to stay. And it's essential to create a world that is more sustainable, that is more inclusive. And as such, combining a CFA program with a sustainability background is actually a great way to have a successful career and also to have a positive impact in the economy.
My journey into the investment management industry began over a decade ago. I was trying to transition away from engineering into the investment management industry. With the CFA being the gold standard certificate in the investment industry, I also needed to signal to employers that I was serious about this transition, was that I had the requisite knowledge, was that I had the personality traits for that industry. My name is Michael Osakwe, and I'm a relationship manager in the private capital industry. At the heart of my work lies a profound commitment and dedication to nurturing and maintaining client relationships. My professional journey began in commercial banking in the e-banking space, where I realized that finance and investment was not just about money, but it was about making impactful decisions that could shape lives, businesses, and the economy at large. I began to think critically how to transition into the investment space. I basically had two options. One was to do an MBA, and the other was the CFA. I decided to take the CFA, and like they say, the rest is history. And what the CFA program did for me was to enhance my ability to understand and analyze different investments across different asset classes. One of the skills I've picked up across the different levels of the CFA would be ethics. The ethics of the profession is seriously emphasized. Another skill I've picked up along the way is my client relationship management skills. It's your ability to understand the uniqueness of the clients and putting the client's needs ahead of yours and that of the firm. The CFA program is like a buffet where you have a taste of almost everything in the investment management industry. That way, as a CFA charter holder, you're able to contribute meaningfully to conversations within the firm, which may be slightly different from your core role. Whether you're going from private equity to hedge funds to commodities, real estate, the CFA gives you a very rich understanding of this. And with this understanding, you're able to help institutional clients to construct the right portfolio that will help them meet their needs. Having failed the CFA Level 3 exam twice, I decided to change my approach and mindset towards the exam. The first thing I did was to start early. I realized that the only way to understand and deeply immerse myself in the contents of the CFA Level 3 program was to use the CFA curriculum. These two things, which is starting early and having a schedule that allowed me to study daily, and using the CFA curriculum, were the game changers that helped me pass the CFA Level 3 exam. It's very important to realize that the CFA exam is not a sprint, but it's a marathon. With the CFA exam, there are no shortcuts. My advice to candidates is simple. 1. Start early. Maintain a daily study schedule. 2. Use the CFA curriculum. And then 3. Establish a support system around you, getting the necessary buy-in from your family.
Welcome everyone to this exciting session at the Global Career Week. My name is Sonia Gandhi. I'm a Senior Director in the Education Division at CFA Institute. Some housekeeping rules before we get started. This session is scheduled for 45 minutes, including Q&A. It's being live streamed on both Zoom and LinkedIn Live. For Zoom participants, to optimize the session, you will be muted throughout the session. Questions should be submitted via the Q&A box. For LinkedIn Live participants, questions can be submitted via the chat. We will keep the session interesting. We'll run a few polling questions and you'll be prompted to respond to those. Today's topic is Pioneering Change, Careers in Sustainability. I'm delighted to be joined here today by Stephanie Potter. She's former Director Sustainability Private Markets at S&P Global. Stephanie, a very warm welcome. Stephanie is a passionate sustainability leader. She has worked directly with financial institutions on sustainability risk, portfolio analytics, and data since 2016. Today, I'll be speaking to Stephanie about a wide range of issues pertaining to sustainability. Why sustainability matters in finance? What are the big challenges in sustainable finance today? We'll talk about global trends. Stephanie will share her experiences working with financial institutions on various aspects of sustainability. We'll discuss the skills and knowledge that young professionals need to develop and much, much more. So thank you for joining us for this wide-ranging discussion today. As mentioned earlier, you will also have time to ask Stephanie some burning questions you might be grappling with. We have people streaming from LinkedIn Live and Zoom both, so I encourage you to post your questions in LinkedIn Live comments feature or the Zoom Q&A feature, depending on which platform you are using. The session will be peppered with polls. You will have opportunities to express your point of view through these polling questions during the course of my conversation. So stay alert, stay engaged, and I hope you enjoy the session. Why don't we get started with a fun question for all participants? If I were to ask you to define sustainability in one word, what word would you use? For Zoom, for people who are logged in via Zoom, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. The chat function is disabled. So please put your responses in the Q&A box. If I were to ask you to define sustainability in one word, what would be that word? How would you define sustainability in one word? Let's have some responses come in. Future, I like that. Okay, future again, I see. I do agree, that is the future. Engagement, absolutely. Let's look at some more responses. Long-lasting and recurring. Long-term, I have to say I agree with all of those. Future, long-term engagement, long-lasting, consistent positive elements through time. Safety, longevity, absolutely. Responsible, continuity, everlasting, resilience. Well, I love these responses. So thanks to everyone for, starting to get engaged with us. Moving on. Stephanie, in my role as sustainability lead at the Institute, I work with a lot of sustainability professionals like yourself. And there's a real acknowledgement of the fact that sustainability is not a passing fad, it's here to stay. Why do you think sustainability matters in finance today?
Oh, wow. I mean, I love the answers from the audience. I think sustainability, in some ways has been painted and accurately as an ancillary altruism. But really, it's a new pragmatism. Our financial infrastructure requires a fundamental update to address modern challenges. I think one of the biggest problems is it's very simple. It's very difficult to price in negative externalities of investments and corporate behavior. So we really do have to evolve beyond the limitations of quarterly reporting and account for long-term risks like climate and environmental degradation, even income inequality. One example that comes to mind for me, I was just reading about a few days ago, was microplastics. Recent studies show exponential growth in microplastics over the past 50 years. I was even reading one study in Nature magazine that suggested Today we could have up to a plastic spoon's worth of microplastics in our brains.
Wow.
That's a very unsettling thought. I had to mention it because I keep thinking about it. But I mean, so it's not meant to suggest that as investors we're also activists. I mean, in some ways, I think that's correct, but in many ways, no. Plastics will continue to have its uses, but the proliferation of things like single-use items, including packaging, is just out of control, Sonia. Just 9% of plastics get recycled, and the recycling process itself can be very toxic. The fossil fuel interest must be confronted over plastic pollution just as they are challenged over things like global warming caused by oil, coal, and gas. So, I mean, I would say, Sustainability 1.0 really introduces this idea that new data and frameworks are needed in the investment process. I started my career in sustainable investing really around 2015 at State Street in Boston. And we were looking through various sustainability-based data sets, and most of them at that time, and even still today, are focused on the public equity space. And so these new data sets like carbon emissions data sets or ESG scores, they're actually just a lot to understand, and in many cases have been misunderstood, especially ESG scores. I would say investors that I work with who really understand the power of ESG scores see them as a database. They're not just looking at a score. More so, they have a deeper understanding of the issues and are really using the sustainability and ESG data points as a way to make their research process a bit easier. So, for example, in ESG scores data sets, you could have over 1,000 different data points per company, and each industry will have different data points based on financial materiality. So these data sets, again, have been pretty misused, I would say, sometimes for marketing purposes, sometimes for just ease of understanding. But they do showcase, they really help to showcase the negative externalities of companies.
Mm-hmm.
So carbon is an obvious one. We know that's a negative externality. But something that comes to mind for me is a lot of the human rights or environmental issues within the supply chain. So, and this is just an example of some of the complexity of that data. LVMH, for example, a lot of folks know this company, a very fun company because it has a number of great luxury goods. But if you're looking at LVMH, there's conflicting ESG performance metrics. The CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, a phenomenal company and data set that ranks companies on their sustainability compliance and helps them to report things like carbon emissions, ranked LVMH as one of only 12 companies out of 15,000 with a AAA rating for their disclosure, a very good disclosure. However, on the other hand, both Dior and Armani, under the LVMH label, have had pretty horrendous labor issues within their supply chain, Sonia. So subcontractors in their supply chain have been accused of things like human rights issues, where suppliers were doing things like charging Dior 53 euros per bag while Dior sold it for 2,600 euros. It's 1/50th of the price. I mean, these are kind of the grainy details that really matter to a lot of folks. Using even things like data mapping, courts could find electricity consumption of 24-hour production cycles. So it's easier and easier to track things like labor rights issues. As a consumer, you might think twice about purchasing something like a luxury item as an investment piece with this kind of information. And as a shareholder, you might be concerned that the reputation of the company could be at risk. So just to kind of capstone here, that sustainability 2.1, I think, was really about the investment community beginning to understand this huge amount of data that helped us contextualize negative externalities alongside many other things. And I think sustainability 2.0 is really marked by a deeper understanding of the data, but also a much more pragmatic approach to things like the just transition, energy transition, and also a growth in asset classes. So, for example, when I work with a lot of investors today, I think there's a sobering understanding that we might go well beyond 1.5 degrees of warming. And what that really requires is a much more pragmatic approach in the way that we think about the different scenarios of investments in the future. Now, when I first started, I think energy transition meant that we were on the road to transition from oil and gas to renewables. That was lightly the assumption that I think a lot of the investors I worked with, almost a decade ago were thinking. But now, more and more, I would say folks understand transition in a different way. And just to kind of capstone the thought there, there have been various energy transitions throughout history. So in the 1800s, we had an energy transition towards biomass. In the 1900s, we had an energy transition towards coal. In the mid-1900s, oil and gas, and now we're in this renewables era. But just because we're no longer in the biomass era, or we're no longer in the coal era, it doesn't mean that the markets for those commodities have decreased. Actually, the markets for those commodities have increased. Renewable sources today generate about 30% of the world's electricity. That's a significant milestone, driven by the phenomenal growth in solar and wind power, but there's still a huge amount that we need to do. So just to conclude, I know that was a little long-winded, Sonia, but sustainable investing is not just a trend. It is a necessary evolution for our financial system. And as young professionals who are just getting into the space, I think the most important thing is to enter sustainable investing with the mindset that you are defining the future in many ways. So many times I've been in a room where investors are first learning about climate science concepts in the investing context. So it is very new, and it needs folks who are entrepreneurial, who are thinking outside of various silos, and also who have a good domain knowledge of all of the various components of sustainable investing, from transition to stewardship efforts to carbon markets.
Okay, that's a lot for our learners, for our participants to take in. So now it's time for a quick poll. Thanks for setting the context. Now I encourage all the participants to participate in this poll. If I were to ask you which aspect of sustainability interests you most, what would be your response? Would it be transition finance? Would it be integration in investment decision-making, circular economy, regulatory landscape, or monitoring your own carbon footprint? Which aspect interests you the most? Would be interesting to see how this group thinks about this issue. What is the topic of most interest to them? So feel free to cast your polls, and then we will do a quick sense check. Which aspect of sustainability interests you the most? Okay, can we have a look at the results? All right, we have more than half the participants, 57%, saying that integration in investment decision-making interests them the most. And Stephanie, this is really This is really interesting because yesterday I conducted a similar session with another subject matter expert, and the results were very much the same. People were really interested in knowing more about integration in investment decision making. So thanks to everyone who participated. Moving on, if I were to ask you, Stephanie, we hear of so many figures. If we wanted to anchor our thinking around some numbers with respect to sustainable finance growth, which metrics would you recommend? Could you provide us some figures, some trends, just paint a picture for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So, for the last year or so, I've really focused on asset classes outside of public equity and how they've grown and are integrating ESG and sustainability. And now a recent Deloitte consulting survey I found extremely interesting. I would really recommend folks take a look at it. It's looking at the growing importance of ESG in M&A and private equity. And I wanted to share a few statistics from you. 74% of companies evaluate investments from an ESG perspective pre-acquisition, and 99% of respondents considered ESG at least occasionally in M&A transactions. So this really demonstrates a clear integration of sustainability-focused decision-making and corporate strategy, kind of the core of how the economy is changing. Additionally, 83% of survey respondents would pay a premium of at least 3% for higher ESG profile targets for acquisition. 14% of investors would be willing to pay significant premium of 6% or more. And conversely, 67 would seek a discount of at least 3% for negative ESG profiles. Only 1% reported that they would pay no ESG premium at all. So the implication is that a strong ESG performance can potentially improve a company's financial value by 3% or more in an M&A context. So there's a clear message in these metrics. It's failing to invest in improving your company's ESG profile may result in not maximizing shareholder value. Independent of political whims, ESG integration, done properly. I think of ESG integration more as a process than an outcome. It becomes a real key driver in financial value. Another interesting statistic from this Deloitte study in private markets is the sentiment of private equity firms. Again, when I started about 10 years ago in sustainable investing, 90% of the conversation was dominated by institutional investors, mostly from Europe, who I've spent a lot of time with. And asset classes outside of public equity were just really hard to think about. And I think that's changed tremendously. The sell side has also become very sharp on transition and sustainability concepts. But on the alternative management side, 100% of the largest PE firms, so assets of 500 billion or more, face high strategic value in ESG integration. And in contrast, and I thought this was very interesting, in contrast, 0% of smaller private equity firms, assets under 5 billion, report high ESG importance in their strategy. So this indicates a clear correlation between firm size and ESG polarization in the PE sector. And I also think that it presents a phenomenal opportunity. Sustainability and ESG climate are really table stakes when it comes to things like fundraising for a lot of folks. And I think that's getting increasingly important as fundraising is taking longer for more firms. It is a more continuous process for them. So the opportunity as young professionals is that being sharp on ESG and sustainability concepts allows you to provide high value where it might be needed.
Okay. So many of the participants today, they're already working in or are aspiring for a successful career in this field. So what I would like to do is spend some time talking about the skills and knowledge that young professionals need to develop. And if you could talk a bit about, from your own experience, what are the key skills and that they need to develop to have successful careers in this field?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. So I think the number one thing to remember is how nascent some of these integration processes are. I mean, in different pockets of finance, it varies, but I think creativity is hugely important. So creativity in analyzing new companies that might not be covered by ESG data providers. You don't always need a data provider to tell you exactly how to think about sustainability risk. So a lot of companies, especially in small cap, especially in private markets, many companies in renewables, or even spin-outs from parent companies might not be covered by ESG data providers. And by the way, ESG data providers can have a very long lag, up to 3 months after the 10K reports, or up to 2 years. So examples include things like Constellation, nuclear company, Fluence battery storage company, GE's Vernova. You can't always rely on a third-party data provider, and you need to ask yourself, does this company look like other companies that I know? What are the sustainability risks that might overlap with the industry or the region? So as an analyst, you need to come up with creative ways to measure and make assumptions about a company in the absence of data. And I think as analysts use the data more, as we widen our aperture on what is financially material. I mean, I mentioned in the very beginning, I think many investors see sustainability as hedging for this problem that markets are too short-term oriented, trying to understand what the implications for a company could be over the long term, based on things that they haven't used before. So that creativity becomes essential, I think, at taking that next step and putting creative action into analyzing companies. That's a big one. Another big one, Sonia, that the CFA certificate does a phenomenal job in, the Climate Value and Investing certificate. I asked everyone on my team.
You were part of our first cohort.
Yes. And this is the reason why I love this. I love the Climate Value Investing certificate so much, because I think it does two things that are so important, just given how new sustainability concepts are to finance. Number one, it gives you a basic lay of the land. So you might have exposure to carbon markets, or you might have exposure to stewardship initiatives, but this Climate Value and Investing certificate, to me, it really painted the entire picture. I've had a very, I think, unique kind of career trajectory in which I speak to a number of different investors pretty constantly. So my exposure to different areas of sustainable finance is very high, but some folks, I think, are kind of the opposite. They have extreme depth in a very specific area of sustainable finance. And this Climate Value and Investing certificate allows you to understand a more holistic landscape. In addition to this, it also, climate science. The climate science, understanding climate science is it's very important, at least a little bit. And I think that's where financial professionals, at least probably older generations that I've worked mostly with, very sharp individuals who just have not had the exposure. So I can't tell you how many times I've been in a client meeting where it was the first time a portfolio manager or a chief sustainability officer was even really looking at some of the climate science data and analytics that we have. So one thing that comes to mind, I think the CFA certificate, the climate science, did a very good job at articulating In climate science, there's this idea of positive feedback loops. So it's a process where an initial warming event triggers further changes that amplify warming and creating this reinforcing cycle. Examples can include things like permafrost melting, which could release very large amounts of methane, a very potent GHG emission. Methane's warming potential is about 84 times that of carbon within a 20-year period, or widespread decrease of coral reefs. So these are, examples of positive feedback loops, things that will accelerate climate change. On the climate science side, and then additionally, when you kind of pair that understanding with macroeconomic models and how they're evolving. So most macroeconomic models today don't include natural tipping points. So some phenomenal research on this topic. It has been done by the World Bank, also by S&P Global's macroeconomist Paul Grunwald. And a tipping point is a threshold beyond which a system like an ecosystem or an economy it kind of undergoes a fundamentally and potentially irreversible change. So we don't have today a systematic way to think about how tipping points could affect macroeconomic assumptions. And one example that comes to mind for me is physical risk. So physical risk is pretty poorly understood outside of real assets. I think some folks in real estate have a pretty good understanding of things like sea level rise in various areas of physical risk. But overall, I would say the physical risk area is probably one of the least understood within sustainable finance. And take, for example, potential effects of physical risk on things like sovereign credit ratings. S&P ratings research has showcased that the number of Mexican states exposed to high water stress will almost double from 11, which is about 34% today, to 20, about 60% of states under 2050, even under low physical risk scenarios without adaptation measures. So this could really influence long-term economic growth for the country as the frequency and intensity of droughts increase, and local officials need to balance additional investments into adaptation and public health concerns. So physical risk, scenario analysis, both on the physical risk side and the transitional risk side, are very important for early sustainability professionals. And I'll pause there.
No, thank you for that. And there was a question around what certifications are available. So you already answered half of that by talking about the climate certificate. And I can mention another offering from CFA Institute, which is certificate in ESG investing, which will soon be called Sustainable Investing Certificate. It's an excellent offering for anyone who would like to acquire a solid grounding in various aspects of sustainability, be it environment, social, governance aspects. And more than anything else, I feel it equips you with a common vocabulary to discuss these topics with confidence with your colleagues and other industry professionals. And then if you just want to focus on the E part of it, just dip your toes in climate finance. CFA Institute has an excellent course on climate finance we developed jointly with ACCA. It provides climate finance perspective, both from an issuer perspective as well as an investor perspective. And if you really want to dig deeper into climate, Stephanie spoke about our climate risk valuation and investing certificate. We have successfully experimented with many new initiatives with this offering, a cohort-based learning model, testing for application-based skills through peer-reviewed praxis assignments. So it's really, really a very interesting offering. Apart from that, our research, advocacy, and standards division, they come out with excellent publications. And you'll find a link to the sustainability publications in the chat, but I can mention a couple of recent ones. One is a guide on net zero investing, solutions for benchmarks, incentives, and time horizons. And the other one, which I found very interesting, was a foundational overview of global carbon markets. So if you browse that link, you are bound to find something of interest to you. I'm quite sure about that. Okay, I'm going to start picking up more questions from the chat. Stephanie, there's a question about how is regulatory landscape impacting the climate-friendly investments over different regions? And what is the nature of effect on the overall return on investments? So about, regulatory landscape, if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really, really important topic today. I would say over the last few years, ESG has really been challenged politically, as many of us know. And one of the more interesting regulations that I see is the European Commission is planning an omnibus regulation to simplify many of the corporate sustainability reporting requirements. So this regulation would affect CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which has been in force since about July 2024, and requires companies to disclose detailed information on the impact of environment and human rights issues, including their greenhouse gas emissions. Also includes the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and the EU Green Taxonomy. So if you haven't heard of the EU Green Taxonomy, I think this is a really great one to know and understand, especially as many investors who are finding regulation around SFDR, basically the European regulation that helps with fund labeling, are finding that a bit more challenging. And instead, I think are opting for transition-related funds, because transition is less defined in the market. So as a portfolio manager, if you have perhaps the option of creating an SFDR or European labeled sustainability fund, or a transition fund, you might opt for a transition fund, because with the kind of the lack of transition labels, folks are not really getting it into hot water for potential for what they have in the portfolio. So a portfolio manager or a financial institution might only be questioned about their transition fund today, mostly because they stated that they would do something in the prospectus and they haven't. So to be clear, the market's understanding of what transition actually is very low. And some pockets of finance are beginning to do this very well. So, for example, I think HSBC has a sustainable infrastructure label. ING is very forward-thinking in transition topics as well. So there are places out there where transition is becoming more defined, but it is much less defined than SFDR labels for funds, which is why I think a lot of investors are turning to this. And quite simply because the regulation is really, really hard for investors and can be very, I think, stressful and emotionally taxing. Another thing that kind of comes to mind today is I was looking through Fundfire and I saw that the Ohio State pension and Florida were suing Target over DEI measures, stating that they had lost money in Target because of the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that Target had put in place. So these are really important things for investors to understand, even from a retail standpoint, right? Because if you're not working directly as an analyst, but perhaps you're working to showcase funds or be a part of fundraising, understanding client sentiment is very, very important. And on the DEI topic too, Vanguard did a phenomenal study a few years ago that I also did a webinar on, and It was called Diversity Matters, the role of gender diversity on U.S. active equity fund performance. If you need the link, I can send it to anyone who asks for it. But it found that gender balanced investment teams tend to outperform single gender teams, with the most robust performance seen in funds where the fraction of women was more than 50%. So the study found that gender diverse teams outperform single gender teams by as much as 38 basis points annually, even for controlling other factors like education.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think it's time for a polling question now. So the next polling question has been set up to make sure that after this webinar, there is a call to action for the participants. So I'm posing a challenge for all our participants. I would like you to set a personal goal to continue your journey in the sustainability space. So if I were to ask you the one action that you will take after this webinar to continue your journey, what would it be? You would take on the certificate in ESG investing or the climate certificate. You would subscribe to a sustainability podcast. You would subscribe to a sustainability blog. You would like to expand your network via LinkedIn. Or would you like to join a local community taking action towards a sustainability cause? Whatever would be, you might want to do more than one, but we are giving you a single choice to make sure that you know what your top priority is. So let's see what our participants have to say. What is the one personal goal to upskill in sustainability that they would take after this webinar today? Shall we have a look at the results? 41% said they would take on the certificate in ESG investing or climate certificate, which is brilliant. Second most popular choice is join a local community taking action towards a sustainability cause. And the third most popular choice is expand your network via LinkedIn. And then come subscribe to a sustainability podcast or blog. Excellent choices all, I must say. I hope you guys do this seriously. You do take up one way of, moving forward in your journey. Stephanie, I have another question from Kunal. How are ESG factors incorporated into the company's overall risk management framework?
That is a really, really good question. I mean, it depends. From the asset management side, it's a process of, let's just say, for example, we're looking at public markets investors. One of the things that I've seen is that analyst teams will purchase data sets, or they might even create scorecards. So Breckenridge Fixed Income in Boston, for example, they have scorecards that their analysts use to rate companies based on their ESG performance. So they're not just, again, taking those ESG scores and using those scores, but more so they have a deep understanding of the company and they're creating their own in-house scores, which I think is really interesting and important. So it's the ESG integration process. I kind of think of it in two ways. There's the corporate integration process. So as a chief sustainability officer, you are responsible for, and this is one of the hardest things, is the technicals of it. If you have even just a public equity portfolio, you might be using different data sets that your analysts haven't used before. So there's a huge technical component of data integration. If it's multi-asset class, it's even more complicated. You might need to collect data from companies if you're in the private markets, or if you simply just don't have this information from companies. But then on the other side, and I think probably more interesting for this group, is ESG integration on the analyst side, how analysts are doing things differently than they were before. So a really good example of that would be I was speaking to a really sharp hedge fund in New York City that is focused on energy transition concepts, and they've done something pretty unique, whereby they've created forward-looking metrics on generation capacity of utility companies. So the key thing here is that a lot of sustainability data is historical. And as we mentioned before, even the sustainability data from third-party and data providers, MSCI, S&P, Sustainalytics, CDP, all of these great data companies, it takes them time to produce this data. So the data itself is a little bit of a lag. But analysts typically look at companies with a forward-looking lens on their growth and capital returns. So this hedge fund in New York had created a deep understanding of the nominal megawatts of generation capacity from various sources, so nuclear, solar, hydro, wind, coal, natural gas, alongside the percentage of fuel types. And now here's where it gets really interesting. They're not just looking at the mix as a snapshot in time, but comparing the utility's current portfolio to its historical composition, and then projecting what it might look like in the next 1 to 5 years. So this is a forward-looking approach that is going to become more and more critical. To do this, they need to factor in a number of nitty-gritty details: new facilities under construction, projects that are assigned and pending for the company's backlog, facilities that are scheduled for retirement. So this comprehensive view gives a much clearer picture of what the company's future generation mix will actually look like. And there aren't off-the-shelf data sets that are really doing this. So I've seen the equity side take this next step in understanding the generation capacity of utility companies. But I would say, as you go outside of public equity, the understanding of how the energy mix will change and that the potential repercussions on commodities, it gets lower and lower. I would say, and of course, it all depends on the specific analyst. But in general, outside of public equity, there's still a lot of learning to be done when it comes to understanding how power generation mix will change and how that will affect other parts of the economy.
Absolutely. And like many firms I talk to say that, every firm looks at their unique circumstances also and their methodologies on how they think about integrating ESG. Well, there are a lot more questions coming in, but that's all the time we have today. In closing, I would like to encourage our participants to make use of the online resources, to continue their learning journey, to take the call for action seriously. And I would like to say a huge thank you to our speaker, Stephanie, for taking out time to share her insights with us. Thanks to everyone who joined us live today. I wish you all the best for your careers and future endeavors. And we hope to see you at the next session soon. As you can see on your screens, the next session is Voices of Experience, Charterholders' Career Journeys. Good luck, everyone, and thank you once again, Stephanie.
Portfolio management and wealth planning.
Equity investments.
I'll say portfolio management.
Ethics.
Fixed income. Ethics.
Financial statement analysis.
Financial statement analysis.
It depends. Derivatives.
It's kind of like a global passport for me to the industry from different countries because it's global recognition. And secondly, it's about like this knowledge I learned through these 3 exams and also the experience I gained from the industry.
I feel the CFA Charter will help me in my career by giving me a much broader idea of the investment landscape. I'm focused in private equity, but with the CFA Charter, I've gained knowledge of listed markets, which I didn't have before.
It's a certification that you're serious about finance. It means that you really know how to study really hard and you really have a really good knowledge about finance.
CFA opens, so many more topics for discussion with my colleagues and people that I meet on a day-to-day basis. But also, new topics that are got introduced over the years, like data, science, AI, machine learning. All these little bits and pieces they were introduced over periods. I think that kept me always on toes and, striving to new areas.
This has somewhat boosted my career in terms of I feel very confident in terms of learning about finance, and I know what is the demand of the industry. Being a CFA charter holder is definitely going to give me a nudge in my career.
Portfolio management and wealth planning.
Good investments.
I'll say portfolio management.
Ethics.
Fixed income. Ethics.
Financial statement analysis.
Financial statement analysis.
It depends. Derivatives.
It's kind of like a global passport for me to the industry from different countries because it's global recognition. And secondly, it's about like this knowledge I learned through these 3 exams and also the experience I gained from the industry.
I feel the CFA Charter will help me in my career by giving me a much broader idea of the investment landscape. I'm focused in private equity, but with the CFA Charter, I've gained knowledge of listed markets, which I didn't have before.
It's a certification that you're serious about finance. It means that you really know how to study really hard and you really have a really good knowledge about finance.
CFA opened, so many more topics for discussion with my colleagues and people that I meet on a day-to-day basis. But also, new topics that I got introduced over the years, like data, science, AI, machine learning. All these little bits and pieces, they were introduced over periods. I think that kept me always on toes and, striving toward new areas.
This has somewhat boosted my career in terms of I feel very confident in terms of learning about finance, and I know what is the demand of the industry. Being a CFA charter holder is definitely going to give me a nudge in my career.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CFA Institute's Global Career Week. This is the Voices of Experience panel session where we will be hearing directly from CFA charter holders across the Americas. My name is Claire Lampazzi. I'm a relationship manager and portfolio manager with Glenmead Trust Company in Philadelphia. I'll be our moderator today and would like to address some quick housekeeping on the slide here before we get started. We have a number of pre-selected questions we're going to start with, but I want to point out that there is a live Q&A feature for our audience, both via Zoom and LinkedIn Live, to submit questions throughout the panel. So thanks in advance for your participation. Now, let's welcome our panel speakers. First, Korak Kafour, Director of Corporate Development with NextGen Energy, joining us today from Vancouver. Next, Tatiana Hakim, Director of Asset Management and Account Manager at JLL Canada. William Reynolds, Senior Investment Associate with Fire Capital Management, joining us today from San Francisco. And last but certainly not least, Roberto Vasquez, the Chief Investment Officer at Grupo Centollo Lara, joining us today from Mexico City. So welcome again to everyone and our speakers. Thank you for joining us today. Now, let's just dive right in to get to know our speakers a bit better. I'll have everyone answer this question, but maybe Korak, you can start us off by just sharing a brief overview of your career journey, what inspired you to pursue the CFA Charter, and how that shaped your career path thus far.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I'll start from the beginning here. I attended school at Simon Fraser University at SFU. I really enjoyed my finance classes, and I was part of the endowment fund. And when I learned about the CFA program and how much more value would add to me personally and to my career growth, it was naturally the path forward for me. I had an interesting journey through the CFA. I started it in December 2019, did level 1, and then COVID hit. So there was a lot of stops and goes, but I always kept motivated and I kept going with it. And a couple of years ago, I received my charter. My background, as Claire mentioned, I am corporate development here at NextGen Energy, which entails M&A, project financing, and IPOs, strategy, and all those kind of good things. But I'll dive more into that later. I'll pass it on to the next person.
Tatiana?
Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very happy to be here. So for me, my career journey has been far from linear. I started working in a commercial bank as customer service. When I graduated at the time, those fancy finance jobs were very scarce in Montreal, small market as well. And I was very specific as to where I saw myself, which was in the M&A world. And then I went on to work in macro research covering oil and gas, as well as precious metals, and on to working into total portfolio management and portfolio rebalancing in a pension fund in Canada. And now I shifted into real estate, more specific. So one of the reasons for me I pursued the CFA is because it provided me with credibility that I needed to get those finance jobs that I was aspiring to get, especially as an immigrant in Canada with no Canadian experience. It was very, very helpful to show that I was committed to that program. So it does provide such a different set of skills and knowledge that you don't really acquire from your bachelor's or your master's degree. Specifically when we think also about the commitment to the ethical standards, which is crucial for the industry. So for me, it did help me to get where I am today because it was very recognized by my employers. Thank you.
Will?
Yeah, and thank you, Claire, for moderating, and I'm super happy to be a part of this group of esteemed panelists. I think my career journey is fairly short and so far. I should say I've been in the industry for 3 years and 9 months, let's say. But it's also been somewhat interesting in that growing up, I was actually always bound for the legal track, which entailed going to charter schools, focused on law studies, pursuing a degree in political science, and even assuming internships that were on the legal track as well. It was through coursework while I was researching the epinephrine auto-injector market crisis with regards to pricing. I was really interested in business and mathematics, or at least it revealed to me my interest. And through that, I pursued a degree in finance. And I would say my curiosity of markets and finance and my thirst to want to learn more pushed me to do a master's in finances. I just didn't think I had the technical acumen to actually enter the industry in a position that I was dreaming for, which that found myself in a position with Fire Capital Management. And throughout that role, where I was working as an investment associate, I was working with our portfolio manager and managing partner, Michael Firestone. And I found that I wanted to continue to learn so I could be a better steward of client wealth, which pushed me towards pursuing the CFA designation and charter. And I think through that, I've just gained more comfort in the ability to actually help manage client portfolios and continue to grow in the industry. Thank you.
Roberto?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be a member of this panel. And yeah, well, my career has been an interesting journey as well, especially at the beginning. I'm in Mexico, and the financial industry in here is not as deep or as complex as it might be in other markets. So at the very beginning, I always knew I wanted to be in finance, but at the very beginning, I was thinking more on the commercial banking side of things. But then an earthquake tossed me into wealth management. I graduated from college in 2017, and we had a big earthquake here in Mexico. And so the big bank that I was already committed to work for told me they were pausing hiring. And then while researching for some other opportunities, I ended up at a wealth management boutique firm, which I am still with to this day. And I had the opportunity of sort of climbing the position ladder at this firm. And regarding the CFA, while I was starting at this firm, I had some issues with credibility, especially because I was sort of young for the level of responsibility I got assigned. And so that's how I decided I wanted to pursue the CFA. And as challenging as it was, because as Korak, I started before the pandemic and then finished after, it's been a life-changing experience for me, and it's just transformed my career and also the development of my whole firm in the process.
Thank you all. Yeah, part of the goal of this panel was to show how a diverse set of experiences can lead to a career in finance. So I also went through the pandemic exam series. That was a difficult time. I went to Villanova and started right into wealth management in an internship with PNC Bank. And just being so young, I really felt the CFA program was going to help to set me apart and gain clients' trust at that stage of my career. So I love hearing all these different journeys. It's not just us on the panel today. This is how everyone gets there. It's just different experiences. I was going to ask a question about a pivotal moment. We've already heard one with an earthquake. Does anyone else have a really pivotal moment of their career that they would point to outside of the CFA program and kind of turning that pivot point into an opportunity?
I could go ahead and I guess take that, Claire, but I think, and as I'm sure you guys could all somewhat agree with, over the past 3.5 to 4 years, it's been fairly rocky in terms of the markets. And in 2021, when I first entered the industry, fiscal and monetary stimulus had bolstered the economy and coming out of the pandemic. And then so I had about 6 months of a full-time position in wealth management. This was before I started the CFA. And so everything was going up, everything felt good. But leading into 2022, we had a bit of caution and worry about what was coming. And that was probably one of the hardest years of investing, where we saw the US bond market had a total return of negative 13%. S&P 500 was down 18% for the year. Russia invaded Ukraine in February. So just having to navigate the volatility of the markets, having to have those tough calls with clients as we, are the stewards of their actual financial well-being, just to me was a pivotal point in my understanding of what this industry entailed and what wealth management actually requires in terms of expertise. And so ever since then, even then, we had 2023, we had a regional banking crisis. One could have said that a regional banking crisis, we would have continued to see further volatility in the markets and further pullbacks. But instead, 2023, we also saw a robust year of growth. So I think, so all that to say that it's not always what you think. And so being open-minded in terms of risk exposures and education is important. And that's how I kind of turned all of that into the need and necessity for the CFA Charter.
Anyone else thoughts on that, or I can move on? Tatiana, you look like you might want to say something. I mean, we can expand on this, right? Think about going through the CFA program specifically. Maybe I know a lot of the folks on the line are considering the program or actively going through. So we've mentioned COVID. I know there's lots of pitfalls of going through the exam program. We should probably talk about our experiences with that a little more than just at the bio level. I was one of the classic people that fell to the level 2 stumbling block. Was a little harder than it was a lot harder than level 1, and I didn't pass on my first attempt. And I think that's a really clear line where people either push forward or stop pursuing the program. So for me to buckle down and dedicate the time again was one of the more difficult phases, certainly of the CFA program, but of my career overall. So curious how others, balanced everything as they were going through the study process.
I could jump in because you all mentioned that you did the CFA program around the pandemic and everything. I completed the program in 2019, so I did not go through the exact same thing that you went through. And I was still on paper based when I did it. So it was one exam per year that we had. So that was even harder to keep motivated to continue. A bit like you, I failed level 2 once, and it took me a year to get back into it. And I failed level 3 once, even though I was sure that I was gonna get it, because it was for me. I really loved level 3, learning about level 3. I think that was like the highlight of the CFA for me, and failing it a second time was it was very, very hard on me. So it is a very challenging program for sure. You need to balance the time management, your motivation, and the stress as well. So having a good plan is important. Start early to be able to go through the program and not cram the whole program, because I don't think it's really possible. Have support from your employer and your family is very important. For motivation, for me, because it was demotivating to fail twice. But I did join some CFA courses, and I have like a little group study. So we were very supportive, and I was not the only person failing in that group. So it was really motivating to see that we had the same goal, and that we were all together. So it was like we understood each other, and it's always important to have these people around you that understand what you're going through. And for the stress, well, the closer you get, the more stressed you get. Anyways, for me, I'm a very anxious person, so maintaining a healthy lifestyle is really important, because your mental is what is going to get you through it. So that's my take for the CFA.
Other thoughts on the program?
I think I would like to add something, at least in my case, and I think that can resound with a lot of current candidates. It's also fairly regular that while you're undergoing the CFA journey, your career starts to change even before you get the designation. So one big challenge for me at the time, and one of the big pieces of advice I think I can provide for anyone and actually enroll in the program or considering it, is just be ready to adapt to a different, employment and life situation in general while you're undergoing the exam stress. And as you mentioned, I was one of the cases who failed my first attempt at level 2 also. And at least in my case, I would love to blame the pandemic, but I don't think it was the case. It just was exactly at the same time that I got promoted at my firm, and my workload and my level of responsibility was completely different. And also after going through a sort of a breezy experience on level 1, I sort of was overconfident and then ended up paying the price. But I think that's really important to consider too. Aside from the technical difficulty, which is important, there's also the life changes aspect that you have to consider while undergoing the journey.
Yeah, if I could just add on to my fellow panelists here, I failed level 3. That was the exam that I failed, and the strategy that I realized why was, it's the one time in the exam where it's the written portion of it, and you have to reflect on why did I go wrong, what can I change, and everything like that. So that was an important step. But I like to tell everyone on the call, it's more about the journey than the destination. You learn so much just studying, right? And you can apply that in real life. The difference between the pass and fail is literally just getting that email from the CFA. You're still learning, you're still going through it, and I want to let everyone know, like, it is a big sacrifice. It is a big time commitment. You are going to have to say no to friends. You are going to have to know to say it to family events. It's a tough exam, but it is rewarding. And like I said, just enjoy the journey. Everyone wants to get the letters, just to, sometimes get the letters and prove that they can get it, but really it should be about the knowledge you built, the connections you make along the way, and how you apply that knowledge to your career.
And
yeah,
that's
a really good point. Go ahead, Will.
I was just going to add one more thing in terms of time blocking, because I think this was extremely helpful for me throughout 3 levels. And that was making sure that you start even more ahead than what you think you might need, just so you could have a little extra buffer to give yourself a day in case you might need it here and there, just to relax, because it is a pretty tumultuous task at hand. But back to Korak's point, it's something you could be extremely proud of. You're learning a lot all at once, and to take it all in tandem with work changes, life, you need to have a pretty built out time blocking schedule that allows you some room for flexibility.
And sorry, just to add on to that, actually, William, that's a great point. Everyone has friends who says, "Oh, I only studied a month or 2." Don't follow that. Just start 6, 7, 8, 9 months in advance. Get reading, get cracking on the books, because whatever they say, it doesn't matter. You know yourself better. Some people need more time, some people need less time. More time is always better. To be in the final 2 weeks and reviewing what you've learned versus learning it now, it's a game changer. So that's my piece of advice on that one.
Yeah,
and
for
also
me,
just as sorry.
I would always target a month or 6 weeks for review, because inevitably it gets pushed back a little. So having that buffer is really good. Roberto, what were you going to add?
Yeah, just to add on to that, also consider the downside of starting too early is exactly that by the end of the study period, you're probably not up to date with the first things you study. So the review, it's really, really important. Probably, at least in my case, way more important than the actual study sessions.
Yeah, I think I hope people in the audience are taking notes, right? Don't underestimate the exam. Give yourself the right amount of time for you. Consider a study partner. I had a study partner for level 3, recognizing it was the first written exam and not really trusting how I was going to judge myself versus how somebody else and how the reviewer was going to judge the written, since it's a little squishier in terms of versus multiple choice, obviously. So I think, and now the exam is changing, right? So that kind of leads into the next topic I wanted to address is the finance industry is ever evolving. The CFA program is ever evolving. Maybe Roberto, you could start us off, since this is a global career week. Just curious how you stay up on everything, different opportunities internationally that you've experienced, things to that
Yes,
nature
of
you could
course.
touch on.
Sure, it would be my pleasure. Well, I would like to begin with mentioning that one of the big advantages of the CFA program and the CFA community in general is that it, in a sense, helps you, but in another forces you to keep up to date with what's changing in the investment industry. So the colleagues we have the pleasure of spending time with at meetings, at different kinds of events, it's just a whole network of opportunity. And at least in my case, or in what I can say is the case in the Mexican market, we are sort of a, let's call it, satellite market, especially for the United States, but for developed markets in general. And I think through the program, but also as a probably regular pathway in finance while working in an emerging market, the amount of exposure you get to different projects, the changes in tendencies or in what's moving the investment industry worldwide, it's a really important and also a big part of what we do. Because in a sense, and taking on that note from the program, a lot of what we do in emerging markets, it's just trying to catch up to more developed markets. So there's usually a lag period when some strategy or some new investment vehicle is starting to gain popularity in the United States or Canada maybe, and then when it starts to become more present in Mexico or in other markets. And in that sense, I think the adaptability that you gain through the program, it's just priceless. And also, just to end it up with that, I think that the amount of knowledge generation that comes through CFA Institute, through different publications and studies that they take on, it's just really an edge in a very competitive industry. And at least in Mexico, for example, I think there's about 500 CFA charter holders in a country with 130 million people. So it's just having access to that knowledge base, it's a big difference.
Anyone else thoughts or some trends that these young professionals and candidates should be staying on top of?
I'm gonna say definitely AI is a big thing. It's gonna change the way we work. So as they're finishing their studies or continuing their studies, I think they need to look to get the edge on that, because they will know more than I do, or maybe my fellow panelists as well, because you need to keep on with the trend and with the technology. That's very important. Trying to figure out what is needed in the industry that you're looking into getting specifically, like the coding part and all these things. So this is very, very important. AI is just because it's changing the way we're working. So if they use it very well, it's just going to make them more efficient. And for me anyways, in where I work, ESG is a really big thing. Understanding how it works is very important. It's part of how investment decisions are made nowadays. And in Montreal, this is really, really the case. So it definitely has an edge, because not everybody who has studied finance will have that little component. It's more something that we are getting up to speed. So I've done a few trainings, but I'm still not there. And I am considering pursuing something a bit more, just to give me a bit more credibility in terms of ESG. So I think those are the two for me that are really important.
And I guess I'll piggyback off of Tatiana's comments on ESG investing, or just the data particularly. But I think and the mentioning of AI, I think like the digital transformation is also real. So decentralized finance is changing traditional banking and financial systems. And I think that's something that also is like also in its infancy. So there's a lot that's going to come from that, which is also a good dovetail into impact investing, as that has this way of, you know, potentially bringing banking to the underserved or other countries in the world that don't technically or don't have traditional access to, access to traditional banking systems. So I think these are also great things to just keep an eye out for as they're continuing to grow. And there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, both the AI component and the ESG, sustainable investing, impact investing, there's so many terminologies for it, but really important from the wealth management side. Clients ask about it on a daily basis, and I'll commend the CFA Institute for that being, again, we've talked about cutting edge. That's already part of the new curriculum that we missed out on, but it's available online and they're sending us updates about it. And by maintaining our membership, we're able to keep up to date on those trends. But certainly an opportunity, as Tatiana presents, for someone to be ahead of the curve on that. Any trends you'd point out, Korak?
No, I think you guys have mentioned them all. As Claire just said, I think they're adding computer science, comp sci into the curriculum as well, which is, I think, a major step. For finance, you're going to have to learn how to do macros on Excel. Coding is going to be important, especially early on in your career. Yeah, but I think my fellow panelists have actually answered that question thoroughly.
Good. Yeah. Well, it's just kind of how do you keep up with it all, right? So maybe we can talk about the formats that we're doing it. I know when I go to Glenmead in the morning, I'm riding the train and I like to listen to Bloomberg has a Daybreak podcast. So by the time I sit at my desk, I kind of know what the big news is of the day and what the questions are going to be and what's driving the market. So curious to hear the format that other people use to stay up to date.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I also take the train into work. I'm fortunate enough to get broker research on my work email, so I read all those to keep up with my industry. So I'm in the uranium sector, so I get a lot of that, and any commodity in general. But for macro news, I like to use this thing called Wall Street Breakfast. They give you an overview of essentially what the biggest news stories are from the day before, and they kind of summarize it and what's upcoming. So yesterday was the federal rate cut. That's a big one. Everyone wanted to hear what Jerome Powell was going to say about the tariffs that are getting put into place. Me as a Canadian, I'm a little bit more affected than maybe most, but it's always interesting to read about that and understand how that's going to affect markets. And as Claire said, you can subscribe to stuff like Bloomberg. There's a lot of publications out there. In Canada, we have the Globe and Mail that we use for more Canadian content, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there.
Sure.
Adding on to that, I'm also a big Wall Street Breakfast fan here. But aside from that, in my case, for example, and I think this happens in emerging markets, you sort of have to keep up with two realities: what's happening in the world, and especially in the United States, and then what's happening in your home country. And for example, the whole tariff situation, it's also particularly important in Mexico in a lot of ways. And there's, at least in the case of Mexico, I don't know if something like this happens in Canada, but there's sort of a lag between when whoever's following the financial markets finds out about certain trends or some things, and then when the general population or our client base does. So it's usually some sort of two-way experience where we have to keep up with what's going on day to day, but also sort of translate that and let our client base know what's going on, how it may affect us, and especially what we can do about it, which is lately a huge part of our job. So in that sense, also there's a lot of, I would suggest to have different sources, to keep up with different points of view. In the case of Mexico, for example, most of the big local newspapers have like a finance related either podcast or newsletter or something, which I would suggest for anyone in a not particularly developed market to keep up with, because it helps you understand what your peers are sort of thinking at that moment.
For those of you taking notes, Roberto just mentioned market efficiency theory with the lag in the market. So he just applied it. There you go.
Which also, I do have to say this, that's also for us, all of us in the industry, a big alpha generating opportunity.
Yeah.
The more inefficient the market, which is at least the case in my market, the easier it's sometimes to get that excess return we're all looking for. So that's also not always a bad thing.
And I think just to add to that, because I think everybody here has already touched on a lot of good opportunities for information. For the students that are in the group that aren't already practicing professionals, I think a piece of advice that I commonly try to give anyone that's, trying to enter the industry is to build a habit around just learning more about what's actually happening in the world, in the markets, and being able to speak on it will move you further ahead in amongst your peer group, just by being able to talk on such things. So
if I can add one more thing, and I think we're all guilty of this, including me, don't just read the headlines. Actually read the article. You'll find in your career you'll mention something and someone will eventually tell you, no, that's wrong. And you'll be like, oh, but I read the headline. The headline's the headline. You got to read the actual details in the article to actually understand what's going on, because the headlines are usually going to be wrong and they're just catchy to get your attention. The article might be completely wrong and boring because the headline got your attention, but don't fall for that, just reading the headline and thinking, oh, I'm going to apply this now or whatever. It doesn't work like that.
I think that kind of is a perfect segue. That's a really good, just tangible tip to people. And I know we promised some career advice from our panel today. So it's young professionals, but I know there's some people in the audience that are pursuing a career pivot point. So the CFA definitely can provide a catalyst to a pivot point at any stage in your career. So for all of our audience at all stages of their career, what's one piece of applicable advice, just considering them being new to finance and the CFA program journey?
Sure, I'll kick it off. This will apply throughout your whole career. It's networking. It really is who you know. It's and who knows you. That's very important. What you know is super important too, but sometimes who you know can be the difference maker. And some of you I've seen in the questions already is like, how do you meet people? How do you do this? Well, you join your local society. You can do that. You go on LinkedIn and don't be afraid to message people. The worst that can happen is they don't reply. It's not a big deal. It only takes one person, right? You can message 100 people, but it only takes one person. So, don't be afraid. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. Always, always, always network and just keep going. Don't give up. That's my piece of advice. If you're looking to build your network and transition into a new job, or anything else, it's all about your network.
Yeah, people aren't going to give you things that you don't ask for. So you want to be respectful and you need to have the hard work ethic behind the ask and show the willingness to earn expertise through something like the CFA program. But that's a great point. I'll give a hint to the audience. All of us are here today speaking because of our involvement with our local CFA societies. So that's a great opportunity. Each society does have different rules around entry, but most of them you can join when you're just a candidate. So definitely something to look into and get tapped into that local network. It opens lots of opportunities. Other pieces of advice from our panelists?
If I can add to Korak's suggestion to be implicated in, for example, your local society. If you're still at school, you have many associations, students associations, specifically to finance or investments or real estate, whatever you're interested in. And this is the best way as well to get closer to the industry, because there's going to be events. So join these events if you don't want to join the association. But for me personally, networking is not my forte. It's something that I know I have to develop. And the way I kind of circumvent it is joining associations and being implicated, a volunteer or anything, because you get to meet peers and work with them in a different setting. And it's the way I see it, it's networking, but indirect. It's not like walking into a room and being intimidated by everybody. So there's different ways of doing it. And this is another way, depending on your personality, but also it will teach you different skills that will help you get those interviews, and like it will give you soft skills that will help you get those interviews. So if you're still at school, look into that too.
Yeah, and adding on to Tatiana, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Do not underestimate the importance of soft skills. I don't know if more important than, hard technical skills, but they are very important. It's a lot of the time, it's not about how well built your model is or how much complex variables you put into it. It's about how simple and easy you can make it for a client to understand. So do not underestimate that ability to communicate. Networking is fundamental. And also just take action. As Claire mentioned, nothing's going to be given to you. And a lot of the time it's trying to make a phone call, adding random people on LinkedIn. I can assert that it works. It worked for me, at least. I could say that at least in my society, the biggest asset we were provided, it's the WhatsApp group. And it's amazing because in my personal case, my firm has closed a fairly important amount of business that started with a WhatsApp to that group asking, hey, does anyone know something about this sector? So I think that's also very important to keep in mind.
And I guess I'll wrap up this question by kind of also piggybacking off of Tatiana and Roberto, to the point of, being proactive or being active and engaging. And to Tatiana's point, if you are in school and there aren't already existing societies or groups you could join, I think you shouldn't be scared to be entrepreneurial. I think if you're already on this call, you are in a sense entrepreneurial, and you already are determined to want to progress forward in your career, whatever that may be. So I think if there isn't already an existing opportunity, don't be scared to be the one to start it. I think that in itself is just a great opportunity for you to learn. And I'll even get a little cheesy here, but I think being authentic to yourself with what you're passionate about and what you think is valuable for your life. I think by aligning your values and passions with what you want to do in your career will just make growth a natural part of the journey, and success will follow, because as a result, your genuine commitment to learning and excellence will just shine through. So
that's a really great point. Good tips from all our panelists. I know there was a question out there on networking, so I'll just add that we've talked about networking in a broad sense out in the community with our societies, with associations. I would encourage, I'm sure the panelists would encourage networking within your organization. There's a lot of opportunities at the school you're in the job you currently have. I got to Glenmead from relationships with people that I built at PNC. So there's one aspect of networking that's the broader, but you don't want to underestimate the network that's really local and that you already have and see every day, and keep building those foundations within your organization. Some of those people that brought me over to Glenmead have been really also key mentors to my career. I know that's a topic that gets a lot of discussion, so definitely want to hear from the panelists their mentor experience, mentee experience, thoughts on the importance of mentorship. Maybe Tatiana, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I can definitely start. Mentorship, actually, at the beginning, I wasn't really sure about it. But I knew somebody who was running a program in an organization for women in real estate. And by talking to her about my situation at work and everything, she's like, oh, I'm sure you can benefit from having a mentor. And I did I did apply, and the mentor was super helpful for that specific time in my career, because I was able to introspect contributing her experience, helped me rethink about what was going on with me. It helped me get to the next steps, because I was at a point where I was having kind of a setback at work, and it helped me go get different skills outside of my job from those conversations. And I currently have also a mentor internally. I've been at this job for almost a year, and I was assigned a mentor, and it's really crucial to help you at the beginning. And yes, I really think it's important to go get a mentor. You're going to have different mentors at different times of your life that will bring you something different according to your objectives, because the objectives will change. So I definitely encourage the participants to look into that as well, even while they're at school. This can be also very helpful.
A lot of schools, I know Villanova had a mentorship program, and with former alumni, and similar to Will, I thought I wanted to go into law. So I had a lawyer mentor, and then that kind of sparked my awakening of a pivot point. So it's just like they say with jobs and experiences, sometimes it's just to figure out what you don't want to do, and listening to others and gaining their experience can help to streamline some things for you, which is always a benefit. Any of our other panelists want to weigh in on mentorship? Korak, you came
Sure.
off
Yeah,
mute.
No, sorry,
No,
Roberto, you go ahead.
You guys go
It's
ahead,
okay.
yeah.
I was just gonna mention, for example, in my case, at the beginning of my career, I thought I didn't need a mentor, and then I tried to figure a lot of things out on my own. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But then later on, when I had the chance of having mentors, not only in the technical side of finance, but also just in career principles in general, or even in life, as life still changes, as you become a part of a more mature sort of workforce, and things start to get different. It's really valuable to have someone who has been there to let you know their insights. So I think that in a sense, it does jumpstart a lot of the processes that you have to go through. They are way easier and smoother if you have the guidance of someone who knows what you're going through or has been there before. And also, it's maybe not a necessity, but it really saves you a lot of hardship that maybe you don't have to go through. So I would suggest that if you have the chance, you try to get mentorship.
Shaking their head. Will?
I was going to say that as well, but I guess I'll add to your point, Clara. Even in the decision to switch from law to finance, I was lucky enough that I had mentors throughout my master's program that helped me navigate even where I wanted to work within finance, knowing that it's a big ocean of opportunity with a bunch of different functions and roles. And so by having mentors that could help me align my strengths and weaknesses with a role that would best suit that and foster further growth was just invaluable,
100%. That's how I ended up on the wealth management side, right? There's the technical skills from the CFA. You have to have that to manage client assets, but there's also the relationship component. And I really liked the blend of both and thought that would be a good path for me. And thus far it has. So something that's really important to wealth management, and we touched on it briefly before, was beyond the technical skills, the soft skills side. So we've talked about the importance of networking, finding a mentor, but we talked a little bit about just like work ethic, but are there other specific soft skills you would point to? I know I always encourage people that ask me this question to be proactive when you're in a lower role within your organization. You're relying on the people ahead of you to give you work. to the extent that you can flip that around and just listen in on their meetings and proactively identify what you can do to make their lives easier, that's going to make you an invaluable member of the team. So that's what I would point to. Curious what my colleagues on the panel would add.
Yeah, that's great. Being proactive instead of reactive is a key skill. I would say don't be afraid to ask why, or if you think something is wrong, even though it's your senior, you should speak up. Whether you're wrong or you're right, it's a learning and teaching moment for you. I know a lot of people, I'm guilty of this too. I mean, sometimes you just do a task blindly without understanding why you're doing it or what it's for, but you know, I just need to get this done by the end of the day just to get on with my day. But I think like as I've gotten older, that's the wrong approach. You need to ask why I'm doing this and how is this going to add value. So the soft skill, I guess, is ask why, speak up.
Great, Roberto.
Sure. I think communication in general, just try to be conscious with every statement you make, even if it's written or if it's in a conversation with a client, but really understand what you're saying, learn to listen, which is something from a technical side we oftentimes don't really do, because it's easy to think that we probably know more than a client on a certain subject, for example. But it's very important to understand where someone's coming from. Either it is a client, it is a partner at your firm, it is even a competitor of any sort. Good communication, it's really, really important. As I mentioned before, most of the time when you ask, and for all of us in wealth management, I'm sure you're going to agree, when you ask a client why he is with a particular firm or with a particular advisor, it's not because he's faster solving a math problem or because their valuation models are better or more complex than others. It's because they trust them. And trust is built through our relationship over time, through listening and through becoming actually, and this doesn't only apply to wealth management, but it's trying to, proactively becoming valuable to someone else. So I think communication in general, it's a key.
Tatiana?
If I could add on communication, it's also knowing how to talk to different types of people, because when you communicate with somebody who's a VP at a corporate level, it's going to be very different than when you communicate the exact same thing to a colleague or to your direct boss or something. So there's different way of communicating the same thing, and it's knowing how to adapt to the different to the different client at the end of the day, because it's like you can see them as a client. So that's what I would add on communication. For me also, because currently in my job, one of the most important thing is collaboration, because I can't do my job if we don't all work together, and everybody else, like we cannot be successful as a whole team for our client if we don't work all together. So working well with others, knowing how to adapt to different personalities, because not everybody's gonna think the same way as you, and welcoming other opinions as well, so that you can collaborate in a more effective way. So, and this can start at university with your group projects as well. So.
Start now. That's the theme we've heard. Doesn't hurt to get an early start with whatever mentorship, networking, studying. It's all great. We've had a really good, robust discussion with some of our pre-selected questions, but we've been getting a lot through the chat and we have about 10 minutes left. So I'll turn to some of those live questions. There's a question on Zoom from Haroon Naeem. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, but just around this conversation of working with a boss, maybe a difficult boss, maybe one that doesn't want you to ask too many questions, and how you would deal with that situation.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I think that was probably based on what I said to ask why. yeah, there's different things, there's different ways to approach this, and I think EQ, as Tatiana alluded to, how you communicate with different people. I think how I would do it, and I don't know your boss, but how I would do it, I would say, yeah, no problem, I can get that done. But to allow me to give you the right answer in the proper, format and the proper work you need, I want to understand this, and this before I get started, so that I don't have to, redo this and put you in a time crunch situation. It's better for us to communicate this right now instead of me coming back with you with something that is not what you're looking for. Or if honestly, just to be honest, if your boss is giving that kind of attitude to you, I don't know if that's a place you want to work anyways, because it's not going to help you grow in your career. So I understand some of us are at a job because, yes, we need to pay the bills and it's hard to find another job sometimes. But I would encourage you, if you're getting that attitude after having that conversation with them, to look for something new. That's the blunt way of putting it. It might be a situation where you have a closed door conversation with this person and say, hey, I've noticed you've been doing this a lot, and that's not my work style. That's not my communication style. I like to understand why, so I can grow and help you do better at your job too. That's how I would approach it.
Yeah, there's a book called Managing Up. Can't remember the author right now on the spot, but it just talks about working with different like a boss that has a different style than you do. And I found that helpful at different points. So I would point to that resource. We'll shift to another question now from Amir on LinkedIn Live, speaking specifically to everything that's going on in the US right now, specific employment reforms on the government side, potential tax reforms, and just thinking broadly how that could affect the global job market. So maybe that's best positioned to Roberto and Tatiana as well, just to think about how are you viewing all of this American volatility in the context of your roles and your assets you're managing?
Sure. Well, in our case, at least, I think it depends a lot on the market you're working from, because a lot of it's sort of comparative. For example, we do have our own, let's say, local drama here in Mexico. So a lot of the times, for example, at least in the case of my firm, one of the big things we do is we allow Mexican investors access to the global markets. So even though global markets at the moment are not exactly rose garden, they're in a lot of ways better or safer, at least as wealth holding spaces, than the Mexican market or some other emerging markets. And in that sense, I would say that it depends on the specific area of finance you're thinking from. But from a wealth management perspective, like Will said before, we're sort of the stewards of our clients' wealth. So it doesn't really matter what's going on at that specific moment. Our job is to adapt to that environment and try to find or make the best solution for our clients. So in that sense, I'd say it is a complicated environment. It's one, at least I had the opportunity of being something similar in 2018 with the whole, the same sort of political line behind everything. So it's not absolutely new, but of course it has some very particular difference that we have to keep an eye on from a wealth management perspective in my case. But I do think it's as volatile as it may seem, there's still plenty of opportunity and room for pretty much any type of investor. And in that sense, sort of diverting the conversation, it's always a good time to invest. So that's sort of a key takeaway that we should communicate to the investment industry in general.
Tatiana, yeah.
So for us, it's a bit different because I manage real estate in Canada all throughout. We are watching very closely the news and how it's going to impact us, because the tariff will definitely impact us if with construction materials, because some of our malls are in redevelopment mode. So it's a bit of a different way that we look at things, but in terms of maintenance and we are are very, so there's a bit less impact or more indirect impact, but where the impact is more going to be felt, it's through construction. So
thank you. And I'll do one final question from our audience. This is from Justin Chen on Zoom. In terms of networking and building the soft skills, how were you able to build those skill sets while studying for the exam? So I think the spirit of this question is the exam is going to cover the technical skills that you need. What tangible steps can you take to build those soft skills that we've been talking about?
I guess I'll jump in there, and I think ways you can build your soft skills is through your day-to-day life. So whenever you're speaking with coworkers or fellow students, trying to actually have conversations as it pertains to the markets, the economy, kind of going back to that idea of building out a routine of regularly listening in or consuming information as it pertains to what you're hoping to, strive for in your career path, are ways that you can further develop your soft skills by just speaking on them in a more regular basis.
I would add to that to get implicated at university through different associations. For example, if you have like a finance association within your university, there are sometimes some roles that you can try to get, whether it's VP finance or VP strategy and things like that. And by getting those roles or just being a member, you get to learn how to network or learn how to go get funding for your events. So it's different skills that you can develop through those different positions that are within the association. I would also encourage to do internships. I think those are valuable, and when I compare with the internships that I've had when I first started, the internships now are really valuable. Like, you really get to do the work that you would be doing, so you learn, you get into the professional life a bit quicker, and get those good habits of how to talk to your peers also a bit quicker. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, I would expand on Korak's earlier point of asking why, but asking for feedback. And if you can't ask your direct manager, ask your peers, ask people to listen to a pitch you want to give and weigh in there, just to hear the other point of view and how you can come across clearer. That gives you some really tangible items to work with. We have just a few minutes left, so I want to ask our panelists if they could share just one takeaway to leave people with for the session. We'll go around and start with Tatiana.
So one takeaway is that don't take anything for granted. Don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. It's only going to make you grow. If you're too comfortable where you're at, it means that you've likely outgrown where you stand. So you have to make your own opportunities, and you will not get if you do not ask. That's one thing that I've learned the hard way. So that's what I would give.
Korak?
Yeah, I'll say this: to not try is the ultimate fail. Nothing's given. You got to go out there and earn it. You guys are here. You're listening in on this. You've decided to participate. So this is a step forward. Don't be shy. Get what you want in this world. You live once. Do your thing.
Roberto?
Yeah, I would say, just in a general sense, for your careers and in life, it's usually not about having to wait for the perfect opportunity. It's about making the most of the opportunities you do get. And very rarely, if ever, your career is going to look like you're thinking it's going to, or like you're planning it's going to be. But at the end of the day, it's about getting out there every day and making the best you can. And usually it will pay off through time.
Well,
And close it out, but just be authentically yourself. Align your work with your passions, and you'll forever want to learn and grow, and success will follow.
Great. Well, on that note, I'm sorry to say that we're about out of time. So I want to thank our audience, both on Zoom and LinkedIn Live, the CFA Institute for putting this panel together, and of course to our speakers for their wisdom and advice. Don't forget, we're going to put up a slide here. You can scan the code and have a chance to win a CFA program scholarship. So definitely check that out. The inaugural Global Career Week has been a really great success thus far, but it's not over quite yet. There's still one more session focused on unlocking the potential inside the CFA program starting in just a few minutes. So thanks again to everyone for joining us. I hope you have a really good rest of your day.
If you're a full-time student looking to build a solid foundation in finance and gain a deeper understanding of the investment industry, we've got some exciting news for you. CFA Institute is now offering an exclusive student rate for the Investment Foundation Certificate, reduced from $350 to just $79. This is the perfect opportunity for students who are curious about finance and investments and considering a future in the investment industry. By earning this certificate, you'll take a first step towards level 1 of the CFA program. You'll enhance your resume with a globally recognized qualification, and you'll gain valuable industry knowledge that will set you apart. The certificate is also ideal for earlier students and students who want to master the language of finance. Start your journey in finance today and find out more about this exclusive student offer on our website.
I think the best thing you can do is to start volunteering early, like meeting everybody, getting involved in events.
You have to always be learning, be a student of the market, know regulation, know how companies, people make money.
To consider seriously the charter, I think it has a curriculum that is it's very broad, but also besides the technical competencies, you can surround yourself with people that think likewise, where you can learn a lot from.
If you're a full-time student looking to build a solid foundation in finance and gain a deeper understanding of the investment industry, we've got some exciting news for you. CFA Institute is now offering an exclusive student rate for the Investment Foundation Certificate, reduced from $350 to just $79. This is the perfect opportunity for students who are curious about finance and investments and considering a future in the investment industry. By earning this certificate, you'll take a first step towards level 1 of the CFA program. You'll enhance your resume with a globally recognized qualification, and you'll gain valuable industry knowledge that will set you apart. The certificate is also ideal for earlier students and students who want to master the language of finance. Start your journey in finance today and find out more about this exclusive student offer on our website.
I think the best thing you can do is to start volunteering early, like meeting everybody, getting involved in events.
You have to always be learning, be a student of the market, know regulation, know how companies, people make money.
To consider seriously the charter, I think it has a curriculum that is it's very broad, but also besides the technical competencies, you can surround yourself with people that think likewise, where you can learn a lot from.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the CFA Institute Global Career Week, Unlocking Potential Inside the CFA Program. My name is Julia Orlich. I'm Director for Partnerships and Client Solutions at CFA Institute. I'm coming to you from our New York City offices, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. Now today, what can you expect? As you can see on the screen, we'll start with a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Then you will hear a short overview presentation of the CFA program, and then we will dedicate the majority of today's session to Q&A, so to answer all your questions about the CFA program. Well, let's get those housekeeping notes out of the way first. So we have 50 minutes together today. We have people joining us today, both from Zoom as well as from our LinkedIn live event. If you are joining us on Zoom, you will see all participants remain muted throughout the session to optimize the experience for everyone. So please use the Q&A function to submit all your questions to us. If you're joining us through the LinkedIn live event, you can submit questions via the chat, and they will reach us as well. We're also recording this session, so once it is available, you will receive the recording in addition to some other resources after the event, so keep an eye out for that. Right, now I would like to introduce our speaker for today. So if we could jump to the next slide, perfect. So I am thrilled that we are joined today by Anne Falgren, who is the Senior Head of the CFA Program at CFA Institute. Now, Anne has over 22 years of experience in the education industry. She spent the majority of her career at Pearson's Higher Ed division in a variety of roles spanning from sales to marketing to product management to general management before she joined us here at CFA Institute in 2024 as the general manager and senior head of the CFA program. So we really have a subject matter expert here with us today. So with that, without further ado, Anne, handing over to you to kick us off with an overview presentation of the CFA program.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I just want to say welcome to everyone who's joining us today. As Julia said, I recently joined the CFA Institute in 2024, and it's been a really amazing transition into a fantastic organization that continues my passion on helping folks improve their lives through education and learning and certification. So really happy to be here with you all today to talk to you a little bit about the CFA program and what you can expect. So if you can go to the next slide, let's look at what we're gonna talk about today. So we're going to cover 5 key areas. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about who has the CFA charter. Then we're going to talk about why these people decided to embark on this journey of the CFA program, because it is quite an arduous journey with a really happy outcome at the end, I hope so, but we really want to look at what that really gets you when you get through that journey. We're going to talk about what the CFA program covers, how you can be part of the CFA program yourself, how you can embark on that journey. And then finally, we're going to talk some about the latest innovations that we have in the CFA program. So let's dive right in and talk about who has the CFA charter. So on this next slide, what you're going to see looks like a very busy slide, and it might seem a little overwhelming. But really, this is a representation of the entire investment ecosystem. And those yellow bubbles you'll see on the screen are representative of where we find charter holders in the investment ecosystem. Now, some of those bubbles are larger than others. So we see that some charter holders naturally gravitate towards certain jobs like portfolio manager or a sell-side equity research analyst. But what we really hope that you get from this slide is that you're going to find CFA charter holders in every part of the investment ecosystem. It really is a program that's going to prepare you regardless of what you choose to do in your career. As your initial job and then all the way up through retirement. And I really think that gets to why people take the program, if we want to go into the next slide. What you'll see on the next slide is that I think this quote from Ken, from one of our charter holders from Canada, is so illustrative of why the CFA program is so powerful. And that's that the investment industry is broad. There's lots of different kinds of products, lots of different kind of jobs. But the benefit of something like the CFA program over other certifications or designations is that it really covers everything. It gives you a really broad base of knowledge that allows you lots of mobility in your career. And on this slide, you can see the 10 key areas that are part of the CFA program. And if you look at that and you have some financial industry background, you'll see how this really covers everything you need to know in just about any role you want in the investment industry. And Julia, if I can ask you, so Julia actually is on her CFA journey herself, and I'm just want to ask Julia if she can speak a little bit about what got her to embark on her journey in the CFA program.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So I think for me, the motivation was threefold, and I need to qualify my answer a tiny bit in the sense that my role is focused on business development and institutional relationship management. So I work more on the fringes of the investment management industry, but I work frequently with investment professionals. And so the first motivation might be a bit more unique to my role in the sense that one of the key remits of my job is to raise awareness of the CFA program and of the value that CFA charter holders and CFA program candidates can bring to an organization. And so for me, going through that same journey and really putting myself into the shoes of a CFA program candidate has fundamentally changed how I'm able to talk about this. So that's just been hugely additive to my role and my career already. The second part, which probably won't surprise anyone, was really acquiring knowledge. So for someone in my position, it's crucial to be able to ask the right questions, be able to take in the answers, be able to confidently participate in discussions. And I come from a non-finance academic background. And as Anne just said, the CFA program is really unparalleled in its breadth of content and in the vast array of topics that it covers. So that has been hugely beneficial. And then I think the third part was really, I know that employers from the thousands of conversations I've probably had over my career with employers, they value and recognize not only the CFA charter, but every step on the way. So even having passed level 1, which is where I am currently in my journey, I know that is recognized within this industry. So I know no matter how my role might change, no matter where my career takes me, level 1 will always be a useful asset and useful springboard to have. So that's been my journey and my motivation.
Thank you, Julia. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's so important to hear from charter holders and folks along their CFA program journey to understand their motivations, because everyone's is a little bit different. You can hear Julia was a little bit of a non-traditional candidate, but at the end of the day, it's really to help her improve her job performance, to signal to her employer that she's really serious about what she's doing. And that's a common answer we get from all of our charter holders, all of the folks who embark on their CFA program journey, that really what they're aiming to do is improve their career prospects, to improve their job performance, and really feel like CFA program is the best way to do that, and that it's globally recognized around the world as that gold standard. So thank you, Julia. I appreciate that firsthand account. So let's really get into the nitty gritty. I showed you those 10 topics that are covered across the CFA program. So what does that look like when you get into that journey? So on this next slide, we're going to talk about the 3 different levels. So most of you are probably familiar with the fact that the CFA program comprises of 3 different levels of exams and learning. And we really created these 3 levels of exams to mirror your career progression. So in level 1, you're really focused on that baseline knowledge and comprehension. You're focused on the investment tools. You're getting assessed on your quantitative method skills around some economics issues, on financial statement analysis, learning about corporate issuers, really those things you need to know to be a great a junior analyst when you're getting that first job and really set you up for success. So then when you move to level 2, think about that as the next step in your career progression. You have that baseline knowledge, and now you can build on that. You can apply what more like real world situations using that baseline knowledge that you demonstrated in level 1. And here we're really continuing to focus more on asset classes. So really focused on equities, on fixed income, on derivatives, and on alternative investments, and really helping you, like I said, take it to the next level, apply what you learned in level 1, do a bit of analysis, and learn about those asset classes. When you get to level 3, think about that as your next big step in your career. So think about that when you're becoming a portfolio manager. And here we're really taking that knowledge that you gained, that bit of application that you've shown an aptitude for, and you're getting to that end of that Bloom's taxonomy. You're really doing that synthesis of everything you learned and doing evaluation. And so here we're really talking about portfolio construction. What does it mean to create a strong portfolio? How do you do asset allocation? How do you do performance measurement? And so really, I think the CFA program not only provides you with that great signal to employers and the market that you are really serious about a career in the investment industry, but we really have tried to tie those levels together towards a career progression. You'll also see across all 3 levels along the top that ethics and professional standards. And one of the things that is a paramount signature piece of the CFA program is that we are really focused on ethics and professional standards in this industry. It is so important for portfolio managers and analysts to understand the responsibility they have to the folks they are serving. You are responsible for people's pensions and retirement funds, for them living the life that they dream. And so we want to make sure that everyone who has a CFA charter upholds the highest level of ethical standards. And so we want to make sure we're weaving that in through every single level, so it's always at the top of your mind. All right. So now that we know about the curriculum, let's talk about how you can be a part of our CFA family. So let's talk about taking the CFA program, the exams. So like I said, we have the 3 different exams. We offer them now as computer-based testing. We made that shift about 5 years ago, but I think that's something that's very familiar to everyone out there. I think the vast majority of high-stakes exams and certification exams, things you're taking for university or qualification exams are done use computer-based testing these days. And so we allow for you to self-schedule at a testing center during testing windows. So we offer 4 testing windows a year for the level 1 exam. We offer 3 testing windows a year for the level 2 exam and 2 testing windows for the level 3 exam. So you're able to schedule within those windows a time that works best for you. Each exam is about 4.5 hours long. You do have the option to take a break midway. It's a long test. I was actually just talking about my daughter's about to take a 3-hour exam. She's 13, and we were talking about the test stamina that's required. So we appreciate that there is a lot of stamina required here. So definitely offer you a break in between. The exam format varies by level. So in level 1, if you'll remember on those previous slides, we're testing your baseline knowledge. Really, do you have a general comprehension of the topic areas of the industry? And so we're focused here on 180 multiple choice questions. It doesn't mean they're easy, as I'm sure Julia can attest to. But that is going to be the main focus there. For level 2, as I said, we're getting more into that analysis application. So again, it's 88 multiple choice questions, but they're organized around 22 different vignettes. And so and each vignette is going to have 4 questions associated with it. So it allows you to apply what you're learning in those vignettes. And then finally, level 3, the most advanced is going to be half multiple choice questions and half short answer questions that are graded by a CFA charter holder volunteer who is an industry SME and professional. And that's really allowing you to move to the next level and take not only the baseline knowledge and the application, but really synthesize that knowledge into a written response. So really, again, much like the curriculum, we're progressing in the topic areas, the testing, we're trying to progress along that career as well. So that's what the test looks like. So now we've talked about who has the charter, who takes the CFA program, why they take it, what is made up of the program, and how you can take the test. You know, one of the things, and last we're going to talk about the innovations, because one of the things that's so important for us at CFA Institute is that the CFA program remains the gold standard for those in the finance profession. And so that means with an ever-changing industry, we have to stay on top of things and make sure that we're providing our candidates the best knowledge base possible. So we have 6 key innovations that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to run through this list of 6 and then focus on 3 specifically that I'd love to share more about with you. So the first one is a student eligibility. So a couple years ago, we changed our student eligibility and moved it down so that students, university students who were 2 years away from finishing their undergraduate program were able to take the level 1 exam. And this is really a great innovation for students because a lot of the level 1 exam content will mirror some of the things you're learning in university if you're a business school student, finance student. And so you can take what you're learning as part of your university studies and pair it with the program studies and allow you to sort of strike while the iron's hot, as we say in English. The second one, which I'm going to talk more about on a further slide, is our practical skills modules, which we offer at every level. And again, I have a slide on that, which I'm going to speak more about. We also know that there's skills, again, sort of like practical skills modules, there's going to be skills that are expected for you, knowledge you're expected to have when you get on the job. And one of those is using a Bloomberg terminal. And so we really are grateful for our partnership with Bloomberg that allows us to have a Bloomberg user guide, companion, and Bloomberg terminal screenshots within the CFA program curriculum so that you can see how you might use them as you go through your learning. We've also tried to create a really focused curriculum. There's a lot to learn for the CFA program. In fact, our successful candidates mention or report that they study at least 300 hours for every level of the exam. And we want to make sure that we are streamlined and focused on exactly what you need to know while still allowing you to achieve that very generalized baseline knowledge you need to be successful across the industry. So we've really looked at what we need to be part of the curriculum and what we want to pull out as pre-reads for those who may have gone through some earlier business training. So things around accounting, things around economics that you may have already learned, but we'll still offer those to you as part of pre-reads. And then finally, I got ahead of myself. We also want to make sure that everyone is successful. And one of the things we know that makes people successful, especially in quantitative assessments, is practice, practice, practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit on a further slide about the opportunities that we offer for candidates to practice. And then finally, one of the other areas I'm going to do a deep dive in is our new specialized pathways for level 3. So let's get into those deep dives. We're going to start with practical skills modules at every level. And this is something that we started instituting a couple years ago. One of the things that we heard from both members and from employers is that the knowledge that is gained during the CFA program, going through testing at all those levels, creates really strong financial professionals. But what we also know are there skills that are required to make you desk ready on the job. And we also know those skills are ever changing. Right now, things are changing so quickly. And so we want to arm all of our candidates with not only the foundational knowledge and analysis they need to know, but also with the skills they need to compete. And so as a CFA program candidate at each level, you'll be required to complete one of these practical skills modules before you can get your exam results. Now, these are meant to be low pressure. They're not assessed. They're really meant to be an interesting and engaging learning experience for you so that you can gain the skills you need to be desk ready. So, and they're really meant to tie in with what you're learning at that level. So at level 1, again, base knowledge, we have an incredibly popular financial modeling practical skills module, or PSM, as we like to call them for short, that is going to run you through all of the areas you'll see below and really help you gain that skill of financial modeling. A lot of you have also probably heard about the importance of Python programming as an analyst. And so we also have a practical skills module around the fundamentals of Python programming to help you get right in there and do that kind of analysis and building those macros. At level 2, we offer one around analyst skills. Again, we're moving more into that analysis and application piece. We also offer some more advanced training on Python and data science and AI. And then finally, at level 3, right now we have the portfolio development and construction practical skills module, where you actually get to see in practice what it means to build a good portfolio. So we're really excited about the practical skills modules and the skills they're going to impart on all of you as you go through your journey. The next area I want to deep dive in is those practice opportunities that we offer. Again, practice is so important for success. And you want the practice to be efficient. If you're spending more than 300 hours studying for something, you want to make sure the areas that you're studying you're going to have the most bang for your buck. And so we offer these additional resources for candidates. The first is additional mock exams. These mock exams are actually written by our exam development team. I was listening to a presentation by one of my colleagues, Grace, from earlier this week, and she talked about writing exam questions and not knowing whether they were going to be exam questions that people were tested on or whether they were going to be mock exam questions. So there's not going to be a crossover. You're not going to, if you get a mock exam, you're not going to get to see the question that you're actually going to see on the exam. But what you're going to see is how our exam development team writes those questions. And so you're going to get a real feel for that and really help you practice that. We also offer an exam day simulation. And so think about that as it's a mock exam that you get offered in that Prometric software that you will be using when you take the exam at the testing center. And the only difference will be then that you'll be in the comfort of your own home, but it'll really help you understand beyond the answering the questions correctly. How do I navigate through the software? How do I feel comfortable using this computer-based testing program? So that's one less thing you have to worry about when you get to the test on the day, and you can just focus on actually answering the questions correctly and not on all the things that you have to think about around that. And then finally, I'm going to say it again, practice, but we do offer additional practice questions for candidates. At level 1, we have the ability to get 1,000 extra practice questions. At level 2, 750 practice questions. And all of these are really to allow you as candidates to use your time wisely and have the best chance for success in the program. And then finally, our final innovation I want to focus on today are our level 3 pathways. And this is new. We just administered the first level 3 exam in February with these pathways. If you remember to that very first slide, it indicated that we find charter holders across the entire investment ecosystem. And we want to make sure we're helping prepare folks for whatever they want to do in the future. And so at level 3, we now allow candidates to choose the pathway they think is most relevant to where they want to go in their career. So at level 3, 65 to 70% of the exam is going to be on core content, the same content for everyone. And then we offer 3 different pathways. So you can choose to specialize in portfolio management and in private markets or private wealth. And the rest of your exam, that 30 to 35%, will be targeted at those key specific areas so that you can get more in-depth knowledge there. And we're also going to be launching this summer specialized PSM practical skills modules at each of those levels. So you also will have the opportunity to complete a practical skills module focused on your pathway that you choose. So that is a really, I realize, really brief overview to a broad and meaty program, but I really appreciate you all joining today to hear that, and want to turn it back over to Julia to open it up for your questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anne. And we definitely have questions pouring in. So keep them coming, everyone. We are going to do our best to get to as many as possible. And you may see as well some of our colleagues typing in the background. So some of you might receive written answers to your questions as well. So Anne, I'd actually like to kick us off. There is more than one question around career transitions aided by the CFA program. So as an example, we have Aya joining us from LinkedIn, who is currently working in IT, but looking to transition to the investment management industry. We also have Huni on LinkedIn, who is currently working in anti-money laundering. So could you tell a little bit about that career mobility around the CFA program and how that signaling value to employers works, how powerful that is?
That's a great question. Thank you all for raising it. I think the CFA program is one of the best ways that you can signal to employers that you're really interested in a career in finance. And it will also provide you with that background knowledge and understanding where you can be successful in a job interview. You know, I was in India and talking to several folks who were doing similar career shifts. And so they actually they were not finding themselves successful getting interviews for jobs. And so they took level 1 exam, passed level 1, and that was a great way to get their foot in the door. And then they were continuing on their journey with level 2 and level 3 to really enhance their understanding and make them even better candidates. So I really think going through that journey, especially taking level 1, putting that on your resume, and going into interviews, talking about your CFA journey is something that employers are going to really appreciate. I don't know, Julia, if you have some added insights from your conversation with employers.
I can definitely share some, and I think we're tapping with that into another question by Harun, who's asking, has the charter gained more value in recent years? So I think I can share my impressions from employers. So what has always struck me with pretty much every conversation I have with employers across multiple regions globally is that the value of the CFA Charter still holds very strong. And it's well known, it's widely recognized, and it is highly regarded. But what almost came as a surprise to me, of course, I expected employers to value CFA charter holders as well as CFA program candidates for their knowledge and their technical skills. But actually, one thing that employers have shared over and over with me is that in addition to that, the second they see someone as a CFA charter holder or is somewhere on their journey through the CFA program, the second they see this on a CV or hear it in an interview, they know that that person has grit, stamina, determination, is driven, motivated, and has a very strong work ethic. And I can attest to that from level 1. You need all of those things to get through. And that is a really strong character testament to prospective and current employers, as Anne said before, that you're really serious about either your current profession and improving yourself in your current role, or the profession that you want to go into. So I think the signaling value and the value of the charter remains very, very strong without a doubt. And actually, Harun has another question, which it was a two-part question. How has overall enrollment trended? So could you share a couple of things with us about enrollment trends and maybe some of the markets that have been really exciting recently?
Absolutely. I think our enrollment trends have stayed very steady over the last several years. And we've seen, the pandemic was tough for everyone. And I think people were reevaluating their careers and the things that they're doing. And now we're really seeing an upswing. I think we're seeing this, the charter take hold around the world in ways that we haven't. And we've seen huge growth in India and other areas in Southeast Asia. And I think one of the things that I think that really makes it really exciting is the CFA always aimed to be a truly global credential. We test on global information. We're really looking at the global financial market, but now we're getting candidates and charter holders from around the world. I think we have 160 something societies around the world, which I think just goes to show what a global network you can have once you become a CFA charter holder.
Perfect. Great. Well, another couple of questions grouped together around one of the topics in the curriculum, probably not everyone's favorite, which is the accounting-focused financial statements analysis sections, which obviously go through all three of the levels. So, for example, we'll have Dilnoza, who has completed the ACCA qualifications, and it's asking how those subjects are aligned with the CFA program. And Ryan is asking, will the CFA program help with accountancy and financial statement analysis? So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think, so definitely there's some basic accountancy in the pre-reads that if you don't have any accounting background, if you've never taken accounting, you'll definitely want to take a look at. If you have gone through ACCA, you're probably going to have a much easier time with some of the financial statement analysis parts of the CFA program, and you'll want to then focus on some of the other areas which are not tested as part of the ACCA. So I think looking at what your background is already, we do a great breakdown of those 10 key topic areas that we focus on, and we have a detailed table of contents you can see once you join the program, and you can really assess what are the areas you can sort of quickly go through because of preliminary knowledge and do some basic testing to make sure you're all set, and then what are the areas you want to spend some more time on.
Totally agree. I think for all the program areas, actually, that is a fantastic idea to prioritize, to assess where do you have previous knowledge and where might you need to dive a little deeper. I think the way I see that the biggest difference probably between the CFA program financial statements analysis portions and the accounting exams is that the focus for the CFA program is really how to use, you don't learn how to prepare financial statements, but how to use them to make investment decisions. So it's just a different lens to look at things, but accountancy knowledge is certainly great. It's a great asset to have.
It definitely gives you a leg up on that piece where you
absolutely. Amazing. Then we have a question around grading at level 3, how that really works with those essay questions, those constructive responses, and how we ensure that it's fair as well. How do we do that?
Absolutely. So I did notice that question, and I may have given the impression that it's just one person who grades each response, and that is not the case. We actually have multiple graders who grade each response, and then they have they sort of work together, create a weighted average so that there's not that bias. We also, in the level 3 grading just finished up, and I was just speaking with my colleague who oversees that whole group. The amount of training and preparation that these graders have to go through is immense. And we have very strong specific rubrics which they use to grade. And again, we have multiple people grading each exam response so that we can ensure that we're being as unbiased as possible.
Amazing. I think that cleared that up for sure. Changing gears, but actually still not quite. It's still on level 3 focus, but this time on the new specialized pathways, which are of course very exciting. So Mercy is asking, do you have to choose one path before you complete the level? So when do you make that decision, which specialized pathway you want to focus on for your level 3 exam?
Yeah, so you make that decision when you register for level 3. So that is the great part. You don't have to do it at level 1, right? If you're brand new in your career or haven't gotten into your career, you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into that track. It's also not necessarily pigeonholing yourself in a career so you could choose the private markets pathway and still want to do general portfolio management, but you think it'd be really interesting to get more information on private markets. I see this as something that I think is going to be more important to my career. So again, that doesn't mean you're definitely going to go down that path. It's just an area of specialty that you're interested in learning more about. But again, you don't have to decide on that pathway until you register for level 3.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think also worth noting that even say if you don't choose the private markets pathway, you will get plenty of private markets content throughout all 3 levels. It is just an additional deep dive.
Yep, that's a great additional information.
For sure. Someone else is asking also on those pathways as a what would you advise a student currently? Which pathway should they choose in this fast evolving world? And I know that's a very personal decision, but I thought maybe what have people chosen so far? I know the pathways are very new, but what have people done? That might help.
Well, it's hard to choose your favorite child. So, but I will say, I mean, right now, I think in general, we are seeing most people choose that portfolio management pathway, just because that is what we see. That's generally what people think of when they think about what they're doing in that part of their career when they're taking level 3. But again, we just did the very first level 3 test with these pathways. So I don't want folks to, I hesitate to say which is the most popular just because we don't have enough data to say that. So I think, choose the one that you think is most interesting, that you really think you're going to get the most out of for your career. And I would worry less about what's the right one to pick. I really do think think about the one that you're most curious about.
I love that. I think having curiosity will get you very far in the CFA program anyway. And also, I think maybe worth noting, it all leads to the same CFA charter, right?
Yes.
So
yes,
you will come away with the same designation anyway, which is I think great because it keeps that flexibility up. Amazing. I know those questions have disappeared, so they might have been answered in a written format, but I think it's worth touching on. We've had questions from all over the world, from South Africa to Uzbekistan, on test centers, where we have them, whether you have to go to a test center. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So we have test centers all over the world, and you do have to go in person and sit at a test center. We have hundreds of test centers around the world. So it's something that you should have, is relatively accessible to most of our markets. We try to do an analysis every year around who's taken the exam in the past, where are the addresses, so where do they live, how far are folks having to travel to take the CFA exams, so that we can say, so if we see we see a lot of folks coming from a place where we don't have a readily accessible test center, and they're going through kind of a hardship to travel to a test center to take those exams. We take that into consideration every year as we're adding new test centers, because we do want to make it as accessible to everyone as possible.
Brilliant. Great. So now we're taking a step ahead to the stage where when you are a CFA charter holder. So what is required to remain a CFA charter holder and to keep those 3 letters behind your name?
So there's a few things. One, it's a membership fee you pay into the society. It does give you amazing access to a network of over 200,000 CFA charter holders around the world. And I think we all know, folks who work in business, one of the most important things you can do is have a strong network that really helps you be successful. It also gives you access to local societies that have local events and helps you continue on your learning journey. We provide all kinds of updated readings every year, updated learning every year for charter holders. And then we require everyone to abide by our ethical standards code. It's very important, and we do it's something we take very seriously, and the charter is removed from people who do not uphold the ethical standards with which they have said that they would by accepting the charter.
Now, there's one question from Rav, which I have a few thoughts on, and then I'll throw it to you, Anne, if that's all right. So Rav is asking, does completion of level 1 open up lots of job opportunities? Now, of course, it's a very difficult question to answer. We probably can't give a definitive answer to that. But what I would like to say is what's, I think, really important also from a motivational perspective for anyone embarking on this journey is that the payoff doesn't only come when you have passed all the levels and done all your work experience and you become a charter holder. Employers recognize what it means to have passed level 1 or to have passed level 2. So every step of that journey is fantastic, is a great achievement, pays off, and should be celebrated and recognized. And some of you may have seen this already. we're now providing some digital badges for people who have passed level 1 or level 2, etc., so that it's really easy as well to show off your achievement proudly, as you should, on LinkedIn and on other social media. So I would really encourage everyone to celebrate every step, because it absolutely is recognized by employers. How do you feel about that, Anne?
Absolutely. I think I agree with everything that you said, Julia. I do want to make sure to add a couple of things too. I think every level is important. Every level is going to signal to employers that you are serious, that you're a hard worker, that you are very disciplined. But I want to be very clear that being a good financial professional, it requires the basic knowledge, the application, and the analysis you get from the CFA Charter. It also requires a lot of soft skills, right? Being able to talk to clients, being able to talk to stakeholders, being able to talk to your boss, being able to write. All these things are incredibly important, and don't underestimate the importance of those to supplement all of the technical knowledge you're going to get through the CFA program. I also want people to understand this is just the start of your learning journey, especially even when you achieve the charter, especially now in the age of AI. We can't just stop learning once we achieve this designation. We have to go into our jobs with a growth mindset, with a learning mindset, where we learn how to learn. And I think the CFA program does a great job of forcing you to learn how to learn if you haven't already. And if you can continue that through your career and always keep that learning mindset, I think that there's no bounds to your success.
I totally agree. I think this is something I come across in pretty much all my conversations with hiring managers, with recruitment teams, that this ongoing growth mindset, this intellectual curiosity, and the desire to keep learning, that is a trait that employers, I think, all over the world are looking for. So I totally agree with you, Anne, that this is definitely the start of the journey, not the final destination. Amazing. So I think we're looking good here for questions. We've pretty much.
There was one other I saw at one point about starting the skills that CFA program provides.
Oh yes, I see it. Yes, you are absolutely right. Do you want to? And some others have just come in. So do you want to talk to this one, Anne? Let's see where we go.
Absolutely. I think one of the best things the CFA Charter will help you with, if you want to start your own financial services career company, is signaling to potential customers and clients that you have not only a strong baseline of knowledge, but also you abide by those ethical and professional standards, which when I'm choosing a financial services company is very important to me personally. So I think that's something that's really important. And also you'll have that generalized financial knowledge that's really going to allow you to be successful in whichever way you take your company.
That's perfect sense. Great. And we've got a lovely thank you note from Fenil in the chat around the usefulness of that session, which is lovely to read. Thank you so much for sharing that. Right. Great. Okay. Well, I think at this point would be a good time to bring our slides back up and show you a little QR code to scan for you. We are actually running a competition to win a scholarship for the CFA program. So if you have your phones handy, I'd encourage you to scan that QR code. I think it will be distributed in the follow-up for this event as well. So if you don't have your phones handy now, you can scan it then. But if you basically have whetted your appetite now and would like to start your journey, why not scan the QR code and see if you can win a scholarship. We have tiny bit more time, and a question just came in from LinkedIn. Is the CFA Institute giving any waivers to certain top universities? So, and generally waivers around the CFA program. Can you ever skip any of the levels?
No, we generally do not offer waivers. We think that every level is incredibly important. And I actually think that you're going to be far more successful if you go through the whole journey rather than getting a waiver for certain levels. Because often actually folks find level 2. I've heard from many people that people find level 2 as one of the hardest levels. And so I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't go through the whole program and be less successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think each level builds on the other one, so it would probably be incredibly challenging to cut one out. And it's interesting you say, and I agree with you. I think a lot of people find, at least from their personal experiences, they say level 2 is the most challenging because of the technical aspects. But then some people say level 1 is the most challenging for them because it's the first time they see that volume of content. So it's really an individual experience. But I hear that as well with level 2 for sure. All right. Oh, we have another question on the practical skills modules coming in from YouTube. So how do these additional courses like the financial modeling practical skills module and the Python practical skills module, where do you access those? How does that work?
Yep. So there's a couple of different ways you can access them. One, if you're currently a CFA candidate, you get them as part of your, they will be within they're a learning module that you'll get access to through Canvas. We also offer them to our members. So members, a charter holder who maybe was in school long before Python was, or went through the charter long before Python was something that was really important to learn or existed, can go back through and go through that practical skills module as part of their member experience through their member portal.
Exactly. So it's super easy to find. It's right there in your learning ecosystem. Okay. And so Anne, let me know if this is the right one for you, because I think, we have time for one last question. Stefan is asking about the link to the CRPM program. So CFA and CRPM, are they different? Are they separate essentially?
They are separate. They're two different designations. It certainly can be complementary. So I would say you don't have to do one to do the other. But I would say if you take the charter and are particularly interested in performance management and want a career in that, that's something I would absolutely suggest you pursue. You see lots of CFA, CIPM folks out there in the world. So it's very common for people to go through both.
Yeah, totally agree. I think almost the majority of CRPM holders that I meet are CFA charter holders as well. And that is actually one thing where we do give an exemption. Yes. So if you are a CFA charter holder, you can skip level 1 of the CRPM program because you will have covered that sufficiently during your CFA program journey and go straight to level 2. So I guess it makes sense that a lot of people add those letters to their names as well once they've completed the CFA charter.
Yep.
All right. Great. So with that, we are basically at time. So we have cleared all the questions, I believe. So thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance, for your engagement, and for all those amazing questions. We really hope you found this session useful and informative. And thank you so much to you for giving us your time and your expertise. And everyone, the session will be recorded, as we said, so keep an eye on your emails for the recording, as well as, again, the QR code for the quiz, and also some other follow-up resources. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. So with that, thank you so much again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Anne.